Hey guys, tonight we're marching straight into one of the most overlooked nightmares of medieval warfare, something no sword could slay and no knight could outfight. Winter. Not just winter either. We're talking treacherous wind-slapped mountain ranges, where the snow piles higher than your ambition and the cold sinks into your bones like guilt after a bad haircut. You probably won't survive this. No, seriously, most of them didn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean it. No pity clicks. Oh, and drop your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the edge of a frost-rimmed forest, morning mist creeping through the gaps between gnarled pine trunks like smoke from a dying campfire. You're part of an army that's been commanded actually, to cross the mountains before the thaw. You don't question it. Orders are orders, but in your gut something churns. You can already feel the cold licking at your boots, like it knows your name. The banners crack stiffly in the wind. Your commander, a grizzled man with a frost-tipped beard and the sort of dead-eyed stare that says he's seen way too much, rides at the front. Behind him, hundreds of you trudge forward. Infantry, cavalry, supply wagons pulled by stubborn, farting mules. The sky's a flat grey lid. No sun, no warmth, no direction. Just the crunch of snow underfoot and the slow realisation that this was going to suck a lot more than battle ever could. No one talks. Words freeze mid-air and fall like hail. Breath curls from your mouth in slow, exhausted spirals. It's too cold for jokes, too early for fear. But both will arrive soon. The path ahead rises into a tangle of switchbacks and jagged rocks, a teeth-gritting ascent that promises nothing but blisters, frostbite, and probably some minor hallucinations if your rations run out. And oh yeah, they will run out. Marching through a snow-packed mountain range wasn't just a logistical nightmare. It was a test of whether you could keep walking with wet socks and a frozen moustache while your belly gnawed itself from the inside. Kings and generals like to draw arrows on maps and say things like, "We'll flank them through the pass." But the soldiers doing the flanking, you'd be dragging your stiff legs through thigh-deep snow, praying not to slip into an icy ravine or break your ankle on some camouflaged rock. And let's not forget the horses. The poor beasts weren't made for this. Their hooves clattered awkwardly on ice, their breath billowed like angry smoke, and their eyes rolled with nervous whites. If you were cavalry, you had to pretend your noble steed wasn't one wrong step away from tumbling off a cliff. Good luck with that morale. Historically speaking, this kind of winter march wasn't a rare freak event. It was terrifyingly common. Armies had to move, even when weather said nope. Look at Hannibal in 218 BCE, dragging his entire force, including war elephants, because why not, over the Alps in a move so bold and stupid it became legend. Spoiler, the elephants didn't enjoy it. Neither did the men, and centuries later, medieval European armies weren't much better equipped. They lacked modern cold weather gear, GPS, or even an understanding of why fingers turned black and fell off. All they had were layers of wool, some animal skins, and an enduring grudge against geography. And yet they marched. Not every army failed, though, some adapted. Historians debate just how strategically sound winter marches were. Was it a show of force? A desperate gamble? A flex of logistical arrogance? There's no consensus. Some commanders, looking at you Edward I, believed moving through winter gave them the element of surprise. Sure, because what screams tactical genius like freezing to death before you reach the enemy? But the truth is, more soldiers died from cold, hunger and illness on these marches than from enemy swords. Think about that. Not in glorious battle, but in silence, surrounded by snow and forgotten by history. And still, you keep walking, because what else is there to do? The man in front of you stumbles and you nearly trip over him. Your boots are soaked, your breath stings your lungs, and somewhere ahead, hidden in swirling white fog, are mountains that don't care about your king, your prayers, or your pain. One foot, then another. Someone coughs, a wet, rattling thing that sounds like it came from deep inside a dying man. You pass a frozen stream, crusted over with brittle ice. The scouts say their pass is still a day's march away. You don't ask how they know. They probably don't. You start to wonder how many of your comrades will be around by the time you get there. And how many will simply sit down one evening and never get back up. Your cloak stiffens around your shoulders as the temperature dips again, somehow. You didn't think it could get colder, and yet here you are, wrapped in a crust of snow and frozen breath, walking like a half-animated corpse. The wind claws at your face and you've long since stopped trying to brush it away. Your skin's too numb to feel insulted anymore. Which brings us to the all-important question. What exactly are you wearing? Because let's be real. Hollywood's been lying. Chainmail might look cool, but the idea of tromping through mountain frost in 50 pounds of metal is somewhere between hilarious and tragic. Most of your fellow soldiers ditched the heavy armour days ago, strapping it to pack mules, or if they're lucky, loading it onto wagons that haven't gotten stuck in the snow yet. You, being less lucky, are still carrying at least part of yours, each link of chainmail acting like a tiny dedicated ice cube. Underneath, you've layered every piece of cloth you own. A linen shirt, thick wool tunic, leather jerkin, maybe another tunic if you were able to loot one off that guy who didn't make it past the foothills. Your legs are wrapped in hose, no, not garden hose, medieval wool hose, which is just a fancy way of saying itchy tights with poor insulation. Over those you might have leg wraps, greaves, or just really cold knees. And the codpiece. Ah yes, let us not forget the world's least practical fashion statement. Originally designed for modesty, and later for ego inflation, the codpiece is no match for alpine winds. You've stuffed yours with straw. Everyone does. It's not weird. It's survival. Your boots are probably leather, soaked through and half frozen by now. Inside, your toes are staging a quiet rebellion. Some of them may not make it. You don't tell anyone. You just keep marching. The guy next to you mutters something about losing feeling in his ears, but you're too busy trying to keep your eyelids from freezing shut. Historically, winter gear was barely a concept in the medieval mind. They relied on layering, animal skins, and blind optimism. Cloaks were usually wool fastened with brooches or clasps, and often hooded if the wearer had money or a very persuasive mother. Fur was highly prized. Squirrel, fox, or if your commander was loaded, imported beaver pelts. You never thought you'd envy a dead rodent until now, and then there's the fringe stuff. Some soldiers swore by wrapping their bodies in grease, literally rubbing animal fat into the skin before dressing, claiming it trapped warmth better. Does it work? Nobody agrees. It's greasy, it smells, and it attracts dogs, but on a freezing march, vanity dies quickly. Some armies even used waxed linen as an early attempt at water resistance. It stiffened like armour in the cold, but at least it slowed down the melting snow. A few eccentric commanders insisted on lining cloaks with oiled parchment to block wind. Again, debate exists. Practical innovation, or just another way to rustle loudly and annoy your fellow soldiers? Scholars argue both sides. Your gloves are wool, fingerless if you've worn holes through them. Good for holding a sword, bad for preventing frostbite. If you're lucky, you have mittens. Yes, medieval mittens were a thing. If not, your hands stay clenched in fists, buried in your armpits when you're not using them. Cold makes you creative. And then there's headwear. Most soldiers wear coif, tight-fitting linen caps under helmets. In winter, some add hoods or scarves wrapped mummy-style around their faces. You look ridiculous. So does everyone else. No one cares. The only thing worse than looking stupid is looking far frostbitten. Some units paint their faces with charcoal to cut glare and prevent sunburn from the snow. You've done it too, smearing soot under your eyes like a war-painted raccoon. It stings, but hey, it's something. And the helmet? That glorious piece of forged steel meant to protect your skull from battle axes? It now functions as a personal refrigeration unit. You can feel the condensation forming inside it, freezing against your forehead, drip by drip. But take it off and you're risking more than just the cold. Commanders don't like bare heads. They say it encourages slackness. Never mind that most of them are wrapped in fur and riding horseback. All this gear adds weight. Every extra layer, every soaking thread pulls your limbs down like you're sinking in a marsh. You're moving slower than the first few days, and you can feel it in your back, in your shoulders, in your mood. Even your thoughts feel heavier. You find yourself thinking of warm places not because you miss them, but because you're starting to doubt they ever existed. You stop briefly when a horn sounds from up ahead. Not a battle horn, just a signal to slow down. The path narrows as the trail cuts between two cliffs. The wind tunnels through with a sharp howling whistle. You brace your cloak tighter and keep moving. You have no other choice. One of your companions mutters that the snow is a curse sent by angry spirits. You don't argue. Some soldiers pin talismans to their cloaks. Iron crosses, deer teeth, tiny effigies of saints or ancestors. Superstition walks with the army like another silent foot soldier. Suddenly a gust hits from the left, and the soldier in front of you staggers. He recovers, barely. You glance down the slope beside the trail and see nothing but white, clouds, snow, the suggestion of a drop that goes on forever. You take a careful step, then another, and still, you keep walking. You know you've hit a new low when the highlight of your day is a strip of frozen meat you can barely chew without chipping a molar. You pull it from your bag like it's treasure though, because in this white wasteland it is. Food has become more than sustenance. It's warmth, morale, a distraction from the dull ache spreading through your limbs. What's for dinner tonight? Salted pork. Again, you gnaw on the edges like a dog with an old bone. It's hard, dry, and coated in enough salt to embalm a small mammoth. It's been in your satchel for a week, and let's not ask where it was before that. Your fingers are too numb to care anyway. You chew slowly, letting the heat from your mouth soften it just enough to not destroy your jaw. You'd be tempted to soak it in water first, but water freezes the moment you stop walking. So, nope. Salt jerky it is. Next you pull out some bread, if it can still be called that. It's more like a brick now, hardened into something between stone and regret. Medieval marching bread was designed for durability, not flavour. Baked hard and dry to survive long trips, it was often so tough that soldiers joked you could sharpen it into a blade. You give yours a sniff. It doesn't smell like moulds, that's a win. You bite into it slowly, carefully, like you're testing a cursed artifact. It breaks with a crack. Your teeth rattle. This is fine, this is normal. You've been rationing carefully, counting out mouthfuls like do coins, 2 bites of meat, 3 of bread, a swig of water if you're lucky, though today's flask contents are more slush than liquid. You hold it under your armpit to thaw. That's an old trick. It tastes vaguely like sweat afterward, but hey, hydration. There's no fruit. Vegetables, forget it. The apples froze solid days ago and turned to sad brown mush the moment they thawed. Roots last a bit longer, but even those are vanishing. Your unit started the march with barrels of carrots, parsnips and turnips. You now have a single turnip, and it's already been promised to the cook's favourite mule. A few richer officers carry spice pouches, cinnamon, cloves, even a little pepper. Smuggled luxuries to sprinkle on the same bland sludge every night. You're not one of them, but one of your friends managed to steal a pinch of garlic powder from the supply wagon last week, and you're all still talking about it like it was a religious experience. The cook fires burn low, barely crackling. It's too dangerous to waste fuel and the wood is wet anyway. Meals are usually boiled mush. Hardtack crumbled into warm water, maybe with a bone or 2 tossed in. Stew if you're really lucky. The scent is thin and sad, but everyone huddles around it like it's a royal banquet. And yes, there's always ale. Because nothing says nutritional strategy like beer at breakfast. It's safer than water most of the time, thanks to the boiling process during brewing. But it also makes people loud, reckless, and prone to walking into snowdrifts they can't find their way out of. You sip carefully. A mug of lukewarm ale can lift your soul, or at the very least, numb the part of your brain that's counting your remaining toes. Historically, medieval armies didn't march with nutritionists. They brought what they could carry, mostly dry, preserved, and salted things that wouldn't spoil in the cold. Salt was king, it preserved meat, kept vegetables edible longer, and made water taste slightly less like old socks. Armies in winter relied heavily on salted pork, dried legumes, grain, hard cheese, dried fish if you were coastal, and if you were really out of option, rats. Yes, rats. Protein is protein when you're starving. There's a fringe theory, one you've heard passed around camp, that some commanders instructed soldiers to carry bits of raw grain or oats in their socks to keep their feet warm and double as emergency food. 2 birds, 1 sad, desperate stone. It's probably nonsense, but hey, you've tucked a handful into your own boots just in case. Rationing is strict, officers get the best of it. The rest is divided among the rank and file based on what's left and who complains the least. Deserting with food is a hanging offence, sharing earns respect. Hoarding gets you stabbed in the night. It's a delicate balance of loyalty, hunger, and not looking too smug when you still have your apple core from 3 days ago. You once saw a man try to melt snow for soup. Sounds reasonable, right? Except he used his helmet as the pot, and forgot it was lined with old cloth padding. The result? Snow, ash, and the unmistakable flavour of boiled armpit. He still ate it. So did his friend. By day 3, people get desperate. The smell of roasted pine bark starts to seem appealing. There's even a guy in your company who swears pine needles are edible. Full of vitamins, he says, chewing them like a cow. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's hallucinating. The problem isn't just the food, it's the cold. Your stomach burns calories just keeping your heart from freezing. You're hungrier than you should be. You wake up at night from dreams of butter and hot stew, only to find your hands too stiff to unbutton your cloak. And there's always that story. Every army has one. The rumour about the last winter campaign, where some desperate company was forced to eat their dead. Sometimes it's framed like a joke, other times it's whispered in the silence, eyes fixed on the fire. No one laughs. The scariest part? You're beginning to understand how they got there. You finish your meal, if it can be called that, and pack away the rest. A few crumbs fall onto your cloak. You pick them up and eat them. Waste not. The horn sounds again, time to move. You sling your gear over your shoulder and rise, bones creaking, breath hissing through chapped lips. The snow has started again, light at first, but insistent. It blurs the world around you, softens sound, makes everything feel like a dream, a cold, aching, slightly hallucinogenic dream, filled with salted meat and frozen bread. The problem isn't just the snow, it's the parts of your body that stop listening. First your fingers, then your toes, then your ears, your nose, your knees, until your limbs feel like someone else's responsibility. Your breath comes out in wheezing clouds, but your lungs don't feel like they're doing much with it. That's the thing they never put in paintings of heroic winter marches, the sheer, dull horror of being slowly dismantled by cold. The terrain is getting worse, steeper, and somehow slipperier than before. The trail winds upward in a series of switchbacks, each one more exhausting than the last. You lean heavily on your spear for balance, careful not to fall. Because if you fall, you stay down just a little longer than usual. And if you stay down too long, well, let's just say no one's going to carry you. Your feet are soaked again. They've been wet since day 1, and now they feel like 2 bruised slabs of meat, sloshing around inside stiff leather boots that probably hate you. You stop briefly to check them. You peel the boot back slowly, half afraid your toes are going to come off with the sock. They don't, but they're swollen pale, and beginning to go that peculiar shade of grey that whispers danger just below your pain threshold. You've seen worse. A man 2 rows ahead of you had to have 3 toes cut off 2 nights ago. The camp surgeon, who's really just a guy with a sharp knife and a very high tolerance for screaming, did it by feelite, grumbling about how he should be getting double pay. The poor bastard didn't scream much. That's how cold it was. Frostbite doesn't knock politely. It sneaks in inch by inch, turning skin waxy, then black. It's the kind of pain you don't even feel until it's too late. First it burns, then it disappears entirely like your nerves just gave up. One of the archers behind you keeps flexing his fingers in this jittery little dance trying to make sure he still can. You've started doing it too, without thinking. And don't even get started on the feet. Foot rot, or trench foot if you want to get technical, is the perfect storm of wetness, friction, and neglect. Your socks, if you even have them anymore, haven't been dry since the valley floor. The wool rubs against your skin with every step, slowly peeling it away like bark from a dying tree. By the end of a long march, you're walking on raw flesh. The stench hits first, then the pus, then the limp. You don't complain though. Complaining gets you nothing except glares from guys in even worse shape. Besides, there's always that one veteran who shrugs and mutters, "I marched with worse," and everyone hates him a little for being right. You pass a man curled beside a boulder, face pale, boots off, rookie mistake. You don't remove your boots in this cold, not unless you're ready to never get them back on again. His friends are arguing, trying to get him up, but his eyes are glassy. You keep moving, you can't help. You don't want to see the outcome. Hygiene is a joke out here. No one has bathed in weeks. Your armpits could kill a bird at 10 paces, and your breath smells like salted meat, old cheese, and self-loathing. Lice are thriving. You've felt them crawling in your collar at night, waging tine wars while you try to sleep. One guy actually shaved his entire head just to be rid of them, but then he caught frostbite on his scalp, so win some, lose some. And it's not just external damage. Your insides are starting to rebel. Constipation from dehydration is a real issue, made worse by the fact that every bodily function feels like a massive undertaking. Squatting in snow with frozen muscles, not fun. Then there's the guy who tried to go behind a tree and ended up slipping on his own waist, snapping his ankle. You couldn't make this up if you tried. Infections spread fast. A small cut from a cracked nail turns into a festering wound in days. You can smell the rot before you see it. The surgeon keeps a small bag of herbs and vinegar, but everyone knows it's just a delay tactic. Once you smell infection, you start saying goodbye. And yet, somehow, you keep marching. Maybe it's because you've already made it this far. Maybe it's because turning back would mean walking through all that misery again, and who wants to double their suffering? Or maybe it's because you don't want to be the next guy left behind under a pine tree, face up in the snow, eyes open like he's waiting for spring. The thing is, medieval armies were not prepared for the kind of medical triage winter demanded. Surgeons were usually poorly trained, under-equipped, and operating by torchlight with tools you wouldn't use on a sausage. Cauterization was common, sealing wounds with red-hot iron. You've seen the aftermath, it smells like cooked leather and bad decisions, but fringe methods existed. Some soldiers swore by poultices made from crushed garlic and mouldy bread. Oddly enough, sometimes that did help, at least until the gangrene set in. Others applied snow to slow swelling, which either worked or froze the limb clean off. Medical debates raged even then, with some insisting on bleeding the sick, others advocating herbal teas and prayer. Results were mixed. Your feet crunch through new snow. You can hear the wind moaning across the rocks like some ancient ghost warning you to turn around. You don't. You keep climbing. The soldier beside you mutters something about his fingers. You glance down and see them, stiff yellowing at the tips. You offer him your gloves. He refuses. Pride is another thing that dies slowly out here. Another few steps. You can't feel your legs anymore. That might be good. You stop to check the leather strap on your pack. Your last loaf of bread is in there. Half frozen, half fantasy. You think about biting into it. You don't. Not yet. Because this is what surviving the winter march looks like. Teeth chattering, joints locking, skin cracking like old parchment. And still, step after step, you go forward. The wind picks up as you climb, sharper now, as if the mountain itself is trying to peel your cloak away. You've been on your feet for hours, maybe more. Time doesn't behave the same out here. There's no sun to track, just this flat white sky above, and the slow shuffling procession of soldiers in front and behind. The trail narrows again, squeezing between boulders slick with ice, and someone mutters the phrase that always gets thrown around during times like this. We make camp here. You feel it ripple through the column like a sigh. Not joy exactly, but relief that comes close enough. Camp. You drop your gear onto the packed snow, stretch out your arms until your shoulders pop like cracking ice, and then look around for a patch of ground that sucks marginally less than the rest. Now, how exactly do you set up camp in a snow-covered mountain pass, surrounded by bitter wind, unstable cliffs, and an unrelenting sense of your own mortality? Poorly. That's how. First thing, you need shelter. There are tents, but not nearly enough for everyone. Officers get the big canvas ones, the kind that sag in the wind like depressed wedding canopies, while you and your fellow grunts make do with shared shelters, stitched from scraps of wool, leather, and dreams. You huddle together in groups of 5 or 6, trying to wedge the fabric between rocks, or stretch it over bent spears. You've seen better construction from squirrels. If you're lucky, you find a small hollow to tuck into. If not, you settle for the lee side of a rock and try to convince yourself that it's wind-resistant rather than pointlessly exposed. Either way, snow starts creeping in the moment you stop moving. It always does. There's hierarchy to settling in. The experienced soldiers move fast, digging shallow pits to block the wind, laying down pine boughs for insulation, piling up snow as makeshift windbreaks. You copy them clumsily, stabbing at the ground with a dull dagger to clear a spot for your bedroll. Under the snow is more snow, and under that, frozen mud. Wonderful. You unpack your roll, a lice-infested blanket, a matted wool tunic, and a strip of leather you call a pillow. You arrange it like a shrine to optimism and then sit on it, knees to chest, waiting for warmth that never comes. Fire is next. In theory, every unit has a flint and steel, and there's always that one guy who insists on doing it the old-fashioned way, rubbing sticks together with a look of manic confidence that never ends in actual fire. You don't wait. You gather what kindling you can, mostly wet twigs and bark shaved with your knife, and hope the embers from the cooking fire can be coaxed into life again. It takes patience and fingers that still work. You're 2 for 2 today. Once the fire finally catches, it smokes and spits like it hates you personally, The flames are weak but mesmerising. Everyone inches closer, limbs outstretched like worshippers around a minor god. Sparks drift into the night sky, vanishing in the snow. The heat doesn't last long, but it's better than nothing. Now comes the hard part: sleeping. You lie down next to two other soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, the kind of awkward closeness that would be scandalous in any other setting. Out here, it's life-saving. You feel their breath on your cheek. Someone's foot is in your ribcage. You don't complain. Sleep doesn't come easily. Your eyes close, but your body stays alert, twitching at every gust of wind or crack of ice. You dream in fragments: warm rooms, steaming soup, real beds, until you wake with your teeth clenched and your jaw sore from shivering. And then there's the noise. It's never truly quiet in winter mountains. The wind howls like it's narrating your worst thoughts. Branches snap in the woods nearby, raising every hair on your neck. Is it an animal? A scout? Something worse? No one moves. You just listen, eyes wide, hand resting on the hilt of your weapon, in that awkward, half-sleep panic. Then there's the fringe stuff, the little rituals people do before bed. One guy rubs a lucky stone every night. Another ties a red string around his wrist, murmuring some backwoods charm against freezing in his sleep. Superstition has its place out here. It's not that you believe in it, but you've seen the guy who scoffed at it wake up with blue lips. Coincidence? Maybe. You rubbed a stone just in case. Historically, camping in the winter terrain was a nightmare of improvisation. Armies often dug into snowbanks, creating insulated snow caves or trenches lined with straw and branches. Others built crude lean-tos from whatever was around: sticks, hides, even their shields. Some leaders brought wagons fitted for shelter, but those didn't help when the wheels froze in place. Survival was often based more on luck and experience than planning. And yes, soldiers died in camp just as easily as they died on the march. Freezing overnight was tragically common. Sometimes it was gentle, falling asleep and simply not waking. Other times it was slower. You'd wake up numb, limbs mottled and blackened. If you were lucky, someone helped. If not, you were quietly dragged to the edge of camp and covered with snow. There's still debate among historians about how much effort commanders really put into preserving the lives of their foot soldiers during these marches. Some argue that discipline was maintained even in the coldest conditions: strict rotations, warm rations, mandatory shelter-building drills. Others say it was chaos. Those who survived did so through sheer stubbornness and grit, while the rest were quietly abandoned in the night. Back in your little snow pit, you stare at the sky, watching the wind swirl flakes across the dark. One lands on your nose and melts instantly. You pretend that's a good sign. Maybe tomorrow will be warmer. Maybe the trail will be flatter. Maybe someone will drop a loaf of bread and you'll be there to catch it. Sleep comes in fits. You wake up every hour to rewarm your hands, shift positions, or check that your boots haven't frozen solid. Someone nearby is snoring, impressive, honestly, and someone else is murmuring in their sleep. You stop listening. You close your eyes. The last thing you feel is the fire's heat on your shins, already fading as the embers collapse into ash. Morning doesn't arrive so much as it ambushes you, dragging you out of a half-sleep with the kind of cruel suddenness reserved for nightmare hangovers and surprise drills. There's no sunrise, no birdsong, just a shift in the grey. The sky gets slightly less black, and the snow reflects just enough light to burn your eyes, and someone shouts for you to get up. You can't tell who. Maybe it's God, maybe it's your captain. At this point, you're not sure there's a difference. You try to move. Bad idea. Your legs scream in protest, your back seizes, and for a few blissful seconds you consider the idea of just never getting up again. Then the cold sinks in again, reminding you that immobility is basically death by another name. So you start the ancient, painful ritual of getting vertical. Arms first, then legs, then everything else, until you're standing on two icy stumps you hope are still feet. And that's when the real problem announces itself with a stubborn, disgruntled "here." Your mule is stuck. Again. You turn to see it. 4 hooves splayed awkwardly, ears twitching with the full, dramatic weariness of a creature that has no intention of cooperating today. The animal's halfway into a snowbank, tail flicking at invisible flies, and looking at you like this is your fault. It's not, probably. Mules were supposed to be the backbone of the medieval supply train. Hardy, reliable, not as easily spooked as horses, stronger than donkeys. The perfect creature for hauling food, weapons, tents, and, when necessary, full-size go. Grown men who sprained an ankle and couldn't be left behind. In theory, they were miracle animals. In reality, they were unpredictable, stubborn, and absolutely not designed for icy mountain terrain. Yours is carrying a small mountain of supplies, 2 sacks of grain, a crate of salted fish, someone else's armour, and a barrel that may or may not still contain beer. You're not allowed to check, but you've kicked it once or twice just in case. The mule doesn't care. Getting it moving requires a team effort. You and 2 others start coaxing it out with rope, while someone waves a torch and mutters something about forward momentum. The mule ignores all of this. Then one guy smacks it with a glove, and their animal bolts 6 feet forward like it's been possessed by a ghost. That's the game out here, keeping the animals alive, fed, and moving forward, one stubborn hoof at a time. Feeding them is its own adventure. The grain is running low, and the frozen grass offers about as much nourishment as a piece of parchment. You've taken to cutting pine branches and scraping bark, which the mules chew grudgingly like children forced to eat their vegetables. You remember, not fondly, the day you had to thaw a mule's water by holding the bucket over your fire, only for the animal to knock it over and stare at you with unblinking disdain. That was the same day one mule slipped on a patch of ice and rolled a full 20 feet down a slope, landing in a dramatic heap and scattering packs across the snow like a loot drop in a very sad video game. Fringe fact? Some medieval armies actually outfitted their mules with custom shoes, iron studs for better grip on icy ground. But it wasn't common, and it wasn't at all cheap. Most commanders just accepted the inevitable. Some of these animals were going to fall, panic, break legs, and be left behind. You tried not to think about the last part. You definitely tried not to hear it. Of course, when the mules stalled, the whole column stalled. And when the column stalled, people got cold, supplies got buried in snow, tempers flared, and the risk of ambush increased tenfold. You'd think no one would bother attacking an army already dying from exposure, but you'd be wrong. Some enemies specialised in it. Lightly armed raiders and mountain tribes knew these passes better than anyone. They'd wait for fog or a sudden blizzard, then strike from the cliffs. A hail of arrows, a few rocks rolled down from above. And chaos bloomed like frostbite. You lost 2 men that way 3 days ago, still haven't found the bodies. They probably slid somewhere unreachable, like everyone's hope. So yeah, moving forward is a matter of national importance. That means coaxing the mules, lightening the loads, redistributing gear when a wagon wheel snaps or a sled tips over. You carry more than you should now, a bundle of tent poles lashed to your back, 3 loaves of frozen bread and, weirdly, someone else's loot. No one knows who it belonged to and no one wants to carry it. So it's become this cursed object everyone passes around like musical hot potato. Someone yells from the rear, another mule's gone down. You keep walking, you've done your part. Now it's someone else's turn to argue with a 1,000-pound block of frozen attitude. Historically, winter marches relied heavily on pack animals, and yet they were often the first casualties. Exposure, poor diet, and slippery terrain took their toll fast. Some commanders planned for it, bringing twice as many animals as they needed. Others, not so much. Scholars still argue about how sustainable these long alpine supply lines really were. Could an army truly feed itself while moving through winter mountains, or was it just a game of attrition, hoping to lose fewer men than the enemy? No clear answer. But the evidence left behind, scattered horseshoes, bone fragments, collapsed wagons, tells a pretty grim story. Up ahead, the trail dips suddenly, a narrow ledge carved into the side of the mountain. It's barely wide enough for one man, let alone a mule with cargo. You join the slow crawl forward, one hand on the rope tethered to your animal, the other hovering near the rock face for balance. Wind rips across the ledge like a blade. Below, a drop that disappears into cloud. Your mule hesitates. You whisper something encouraging. It probably doesn't understand, but it steps forward anyway. One hoof, then another, then you. You keep walking, because if the mule can do it, so can you. Probably. The crunch of metal on snow isn't something you forget. It's not graceful, not cinematic, just the grinding scrape of something too heavy for the terrain, resisting every step. And that's the sound behind you now, a chorus of knights trudging up the trail in full armour, like they've completely missed the point of a winter mountain march. You turn and watch one of them nearly slip on a patch of ice. He catches himself, mutters a curse, then keeps going with all the dignity of a man wearing 60 pounds of regret. Armour in the cold, let's talk about that glorious disaster. In theory, armour is protection. From swords, arrows, angry goats, sure. From the elements, not even a little. Your chainmail, if you're still wearing it, is a frozen blanket of agony. The rings trap snow and ice like they're collecting it for sport, and if it gets wet, it turns stiff and brittle like a medieval popsicle. Plate armour, that's even worse. It's like walking around in your own personal wind chime, one that occasionally tries to break your ankle when you slip, and yes, people still wore it. Not everyone, so of course. Most of the army is already stripped down to basics, thick wool, leather, maybe a padded gambeson if they're lucky. But the nobles, the knights, they insist on keeping up appearances, as if Frostbite respects social class. They clank along with red cheeks and blue lips, pretending not to notice everyone watching them like they're walking anachronisms, which they kind of are. Armour was not made for this. It doesn't bend well on steep slopes, doesn't sit comfortably on horseback when the animal is sliding every third step, and it definitely doesn't mix with snowdrifts that can swallow a man to the waist. You've watched 3 different knights sink like spoons into a pudding of powdery snow, flailing as their squires rush to dig them out with shovels and increasingly desperate apologies. And heaven help the poor soul who falls wearing full gear. The weight alone can dislocate a shoulder. And trying to stand back up? That's a slow-motion tragedy. You've seen it. It's like watching a beetle on its back, except the beetle is swearing in French and losing circulation in both legs. The real danger, though, isn't the armour itself. It's what happens when the cold seeps in and the metal starts to work against the wearer. In frigid conditions, steel conducts cold straight into the body. Every plate becomes a chilling plate. It's like wearing a meat locker. Historical accounts talk about soldiers getting frostbite under their armour, the metal freezing to skin, or worse, trapping sweat and then flash freezing it into solid ice. One unlucky knight in your column tried to adjust his helmet and peeled off part of his ear with it. You try not to look when the medic wraps him in a cloak and mumbles something about not a big deal. You know it's a big deal, and it's not just the soldiers at risk. Armour becomes a hazard to everyone around it. When a man in plate slips on the ice and lands on you, that's not a gentle fumble. It's like being hit by a runaway anvil. One soldier in your camp has a cracked rib because a knight fell on him during a downhill march. That's how injuries happen out here, not in combat, but in a slow, stupid cascade of metal and ice. Of course, the knights will tell you it's worth it. Better to die warm in steel than cold in wool, one of them jokes. You suspect he's clinging to that line because his toes have stopped cooperating. Still, there's a logic to it. In a surprise ambush, armour can mean the difference between walking away and becoming an icy corpse. That's the gamble, die of exposure or die from a blade. Pick your poison. There's even a fringe theory that some commanders intentionally kept knights armoured in winter to maintain discipline. If you can walk in plate, you can fight in plate. Never mind the fact that you're basically parboiling your own men. Morale was sometimes linked to uniform, and armour was a kind of walking propaganda. Look strong, stay strong, even if your kneecaps are currently a frozen mystery. Historians still debate how often armies forced full armoured marches in deep winter. Some argue it was rare, limited to ceremonial processions or short bursts of travel. Others believe that the more elite units insisted on staying fully geared at all times, weather be damned. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, tactical necessity versus human endurance, with plenty of painful lessons along the way. The sun makes a brief watery appearance through the cloud cover. It offers no warmth, but it casts just enough glare to turn the snow into a reflective death trap. You squint. The knights behind you do too, but they've got the extra challenge of polished metal helmets catching every ray like they're solar ovens. You hear one yelp and mutter something about his scalp burning. In this weather, impressive. Later, when the trail evens out for a few blessed meters, you catch sight of 2 knights helping each other remove breastplates near a patch of pine trees. Their squires are boiling snow for water and steam rising in soft curls. The knights are red-faced, covered in sweat despite the cold. Their armour lies beside them, already frosting over like bread left too long in the cellar. One of them coughs, deep, wet and ragged. You don't like that sound, because that's the hidden danger. It's not just the frostbite or the slipping, it's the chill that gets inside you. The moment you overheat in armour, sweat soaks your gambeson, then the cold hits. Wet cloth plus freezing air equals pneumonia's open invitation, and pneumonia out here is basically a death sentence on delay. You've already seen 2 men coughing like that. One's not with the group anymore. The other hasn't spoken since yesterday. He just stares at the fire and pulls his blanket tighter. You tighten your own cloak and keep walking, boots crunching along the icy path. The knights behind you clank forward again like doomed statues. One of them sneezes inside his helmet, then mutters a curse when it echoes back at him. You keep moving. Because whatever else happens, whether you're wrapped in wool or sealed in steel, the only way forward is forward. You're not sure what's worse, being ambushed in a whiteout or being paranoid about being ambushed in a whiteout. Because right now, the sky's gone from gloomy grey to full-on ghost curtain, and you can't see more than a dozen feet ahead. The snow comes down in fat, silent flakes, not soft and lovely, like the paintings. This is the kind of snow that wants you to disappear. You squint ahead at the barely visible figures in front of you. Your unit's reduced to shadows now, slumped, trudging silhouettes. Everyone's moving quieter. Even the clank of gear and the mule's stubborn grunts seem muffled. Swallowed by the snowfall. It's peaceful, in the way a quiet tomb is peaceful. Then someone whispers, "Did you hear that?" You freeze, immediately hating how loud your own breath sounds. You strain your ears, nothing, then maybe something. A crunch, possibly a branch snapping, but it could just be someone behind you stepping wrong, or a rock shifting, or an animal, or no one wants to say the word, you don't say it either. Ambush. Historically, armies hated mountain passes for a reason. Narrow, winding, visibility limited, and impossible to defend from above. You're basically a moving buffet for any group smart enough to know the terrain and dumb enough to attack a cold, desperate army. Guerrilla groups, rebel clans, local tribes, all favourites for these hit-and-run specials. They didn't need to win. They just needed to make you lose your balance, your cohesion, and preferably your supply train. And in this kind of weather, you wouldn't see them until the first arrow was already in your chest. Your hand drifts to the hilt of your weapon. It's so cold the metal bites back, but you grip it anyway. Beside you, a fellow soldier raises his shield a little higher, though he can barely keep it steady. You both glance upward. Nothing but trees. Snow-laden pine branches hang low, heavy with powder, silent and suspicious. Too silent. This is where they'd strike, you know. From above, from behind, or worse, from within. It's not unheard of for small bands to dress in captured gear, infiltrate the line, then go to work in the confusion. In whiteout conditions like this, it'd be easy to lose someone, and easier to replace them without notice. You look sideways at the man walking near you. Same height, same gear, same pacing. But what if he's not from your unit? What if he's... Stop! You're spiralling. That's how the mountain wins, not with blades, but with paranoia. Still, the fear has weight. And right now, that weight joins the rest of your gear as you keep marching, shoulders tight, steps careful. Fringe fact, some elite units trained specifically for winter ambushes. In Eastern Europe, certain forest clans developed tactics that relied entirely on surprise attacks in snow-covered passes, wearing furs for camouflage, skiing silently downhill, yes, skiing, or creating false trail markers to mislead enemy scouts. Their advantage was simple. They lived in these conditions. Your army? Just visiting, poorly war. Your commander sends out flank scouts, poor souls barely distinguishable in the snow. You watch one of them vanish into the tree line like a wisp. No one says it, but you all assume at least one won't return. That's just how it is out here. You pass a small clearing. Just a break in the trees, really. But everyone's pulse quickens. Open space means exposure. It also means a place where someone could have waited for hours, camouflaged in white, holding their breath, waiting for the right moment. Then, a sound. Sharp. A crack. You freeze again. The line tenses. Weapons unsheathe in a slow, shivery rustle. But it's just a branch, a huge one. Overloaded with snow, finally giving up and crashing to the forest floor. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding, and so does everyone else. No one says anything. There's an unspoken agreement not to joke right now. Still, you stay alert. Because sometimes, the attack does come. You remember a tale from another soldier, told in low tones over a weak campfire. A mountain raid on a winter column not far from here. Ambushers rolled boulders down a slope, crushed supply wagons, then picked off stragglers in the panic. They wore masks carved from wood, painted white, and moved through the snow like ghosts. Only a handful of survivors made it out, and they were never quite the same. Your hand tightens on your hilt again. You'd like to say you don't believe in ghosts, but out here, everything feels haunted. And then, just like that, visibility returns. The snow thins, the path widens slightly, and you can make out the full line of your column again. No one's dead, no one's missing, probably. You don't check too hard. The truth is, the constant tension wears you down more than any physical threat. Every branch looks like a blade, every shadow hides an enemy. and after a while you start wondering if you'd even quite fight back when the ambush comes, or if you'd just lie down in the snow and let it happen. That's the most dangerous part, not the attack itself, but how ready you are to stop resisting it. You're not the only one who feels it. You catch glances from others, wide-eyed, darting, tired. No one wants to say it, but everyone's expecting something. The attack, the end, the tipping point. It's like standing on the edge of a frozen lake and hearing it crack. Historically, soldiers who survived winter ambushes often described it not in terms of violence, but confusion. I couldn't see, they'd say. I didn't know who was who. That's the scariest part. Not dying. Getting lost in the chaos and killing your own. Eventually the tension fades, just enough for people to start breathing normally again. But it never really leaves. It hangs in the air like a low drumbeat. Because out here in the snow, ambush isn't always a physical thing. Sometimes the mountain is the enemy, and it's winning. Night comes early in the mountains. One moment you're marching under that flat, grim ceiling of grey, and the next, darkness has spilled down the slopes like a flood. There's no sunset to mark it, no golden glow, no poetic closure. Just a slow suffocation of light until you're left standing in a world where everything is either black or white, and sometimes you're not sure which is which. The fire's a pathetic little thing tonight, just a handful of sticks and wet bark that hiss more than they burn. You're all crouched around it like moths with trust issues, faces drawn, eyes glassy, steam rising from cloaks as the snow that clings to you slowly melts and drips. Your socks are hanging from a stick nearby. They aren't drying, but it makes you feel like you're doing something about it. You don't want to go to sleep. No one really does, not tonight. Because tonight, the wolves are back. You haven't seen them, not really, but you've heard them. Long, low howls drifting through the trees like smoke, soft and distant and unmistakable. The kind of sound that drills straight into your spine and tells your bones it's time to get scared. And the horses know. That's how you really know it's real. The horses, usually sullen and tired and barely responsive, have been snorting and stamping since sunset. One even tried to break its tether and bolt down the slope, hooves skidding in the snow. Took 3 men to hold it. Another mule just stopped moving. It stands frozen now, staring into the woods, ears up as if it's watching something move just beyond the reach of the firelight. You wrap your blanket tighter and glance toward the trees. It's too dark to see anything clearly. Just vague shapes, some of them trees, some of them possibly not. You tell yourself it's your imagination, and then someone mutters, "There used to be more birds." He's right. The forest is too quiet. The normal sounds, crackling branches, distant caws, wind, shifting snow from high limbs, have gone missing. What's left is silence, sharp, uncomfortable, like something's holding its breath. You pull your dagger from your belt and lay it across your lap. It won't help. You know that, but it feels better than nothing. Historically, wolves were a very real threat to medieval armies, especially in the dead of winter. Food was scarce. Wild prey vanished into deeper forests or froze in place. So wolves, desperate and hungry, turned toward human camps, not out of bravery but out of starvation. Scavengers first, but bolder in packs. They would wait until soldiers strayed from the fire, dozing on watch or wandering off to relieve themselves. Sometimes they'd just follow, at a distance for days, watching, waiting. You've heard the stories, every soldier has. The one about the scout who went missing, and all they found was a trail of red on the snow and 1 boot. The one about the sentry who fell asleep and woke up with something breathing on him. That one guy swears he saw eyes in the darkness. 4 of them, low to the ground, reflecting the firelight like twin pairs of glass. There's always some debate about whether wolves would actually attack a full camp, though. Some say no, they are cautious, intelligent, afraid of fire. Others insist that a starving pack in the dead of winter will do anything, especially if they sense weakness. A dying man, a wounded animal, a half-frozen soldier left behind during a march. It's not pretty. It's not even savage. It's just nature cashing in on your bad decisions. Then there are the fringe stories. The weird ones. Not just wolves, but things that look like wolves. Bigger. Smarter. Not right. You've heard whispers. Shadow wolves, demon dogs, cursed spirits of the mountains that follow armies and feed on the dead. They're the kind of tales passed around after too much ale, but now, with the fire low and the woods too quiet, they feel a little too real. Someone tosses a log into the flames, and the sudden flare of light makes everyone jump. You all laugh nervously like it was a joke, but no one looks away from the trees. You get assigned to the second watch. Lucky you. You wrap a rag around your face to keep your nose from freezing off and sit near the fire, eyes wide, ears sharper than they've ever been in your life. Your sword lies across your lap now. The dagger wasn't enough. You hear a crunch behind you and turn so fast you nearly slice your own knee. But it's just a mule shifting in its sleep, groaning like an old man in a bad bed. You curse quietly and relax. Then the howling starts again. Closer this time. Everyone hears it. Even the men sleeping start to stir, pulling blankets tighter, hands twitching toward weapons they can't use in dreams. The fire pops once and the shadows dance across the snow like a warning. You grip your sword tighter, not out of confidence, but because your fingers are starting to go numb, and holding steel at least makes them feel like they still exist. No one dies that night, not that you know of, but you wake to find a trail of prints near the edge of camp, deep ones, not boots, not hooves, paws. A soldier swears he saw yellow eyes in the trees. Another says something stole half the dried meat from the pack mule while you were all asleep. Someone else finds a bone, gnawed clean and cracked open. You're pretty sure it wasn't there yesterday. The commander brushes it all off, of course. Wolves won't attack a full unit. Sure, you nod. You all nod. But tonight no one builds their tents near the edge of camp, and no one sleeps without a weapon in reach, just in case. By now, even your expectations are starting to freeze. You used to think you could rely on basic things, like the comfort of a hot meal, the rhythm of the march, maybe even a warm fire at night if the wind wasn't too sadistic. But now, 10 days deep into this frostbitten march through the mountains, your bar for joy has plummeted to a single burning stick and bread that doesn't break your teeth. And tonight, you don't even get the stick. You sit huddled in your cloak like a wilted shrub, watching a cluster of soldiers poke half-heartedly at a fire that refuses to be born. The wood is too wet, the wind too strong, the snow too persistent. Every few minutes someone mumbles that they think it's catching this time, and everyone leans in, only for the smoke to puff and vanish, the pile collapsing in on itself like a bad promise. There's not enough firewood. There hasn't been for days. What you thought was a simple nuisance, just another little hardship to roll your eyes at, is quickly becoming a full-blown crisis. Cold you can handle. Misery, sure. But no fire. That's a different monster entirely. In theory, you're surrounded by a forest. In practice, it's a graveyard of frozen trees locked in permafrost. The younger pines are too green and full of sap. They smoke and spit but won't hold a flame. The older trees are either unreachable or stripped bare by the first wave of foragers. You see a soldier trying to split a half-frozen branch with his belt knife, and it's going about as well as you'd expect. Splinters, swearing, blood, repeat, and the snow doesn't help. It's buried everything useful. Even the kindling, the dry twigs and bark you'd normally scoop from beneath trees, is now soggy or encased in crusty layers of frost. Some desperate souls dig down 2 or 3 feet, convinced they'll find something dry at the base of a stump. What they usually find is more ice and a new hatred for trees. You start to understand why, historically, entire companies of soldiers just gave up in these conditions. Not because of wounds or wolves or starvation, but because the sheer bone-deep cold stole their will to move. Fire wasn't a luxury. It was the dividing line between survival and slow, quiet death. Without it, nothing worked. Bodies stiffened, spirits collapsed, and food, let's talk about that little treat. Tonight's rations are a handful of oats and a sliver of cheese you could easily mistake for chalk. It's supposed to be cooked into a kind of porridge, but that requires heat, which you don't have, so you chew it raw, wet oats, icy crumbs, a bite of despair between frozen molars. A few soldiers gather around the camp's only functioning fire, a miserable flame just barely clinging to life thanks to someone's clever use of animal fat and half-burned wagon wood. You edge closer, hoping to steal a little warmth. The guy tending it doesn't say anything, but his eyes warn you not to crowd too close. It's the unspoken rule now: fire belongs to the man who made it, and everyone else has to beg, borrow, or freeze. One guy in your unit has taken to carrying a bundle of firewood like it's his most prized possession, which, to be fair, it is. He found it wedged inside an abandoned hunter's shelter on day 7, perfectly dry and aged. Since then, he's become the closest thing the group has to royalty. He trades kindling for rations, for blankets, for even small sips of alcohol. One man even offered up a dagger. The answer was no. And speaking of alcohol, remember when you thought ale was just for morale? Yeah, turns out it's also currency. Soldiers hoard whatever's left in their flasks like it's liquid gold. Not because they're trying to get drunk, though no one would blame them, but because even a warm gulp can cut through the ice in your veins for a few blessed seconds. Then it fades, and the cold comes back, twice as bitter. A few of the more desperate ones try to burn whatever they can find, scraps of parchment, old rope, bits of clothing. One guy burned his left boot lining. Another tore apart a small wooden flute someone had been playing for morale. The guy with the flute didn't even protest. He just stared into the flames as the notes burned away. Historically, the firewood famine was one of the most consistent killers on any cold weather campaign. Armies marched through regions stripped of trees by locals who knew what was coming. Others passed through elevations where wood simply didn't grow. Some commanders tried to bring firewood with them, on sleds or in carts, but that extra weight often slowed the column or got dumped when the terrain turned cruel. And once the wood was gone, it was improvisation or nothing. You've heard tales, whispers, mostly, of armies burning their own shields for heat, their own bows, anything wooden that could be spared. Sometimes it was worth it. Sometimes it meant freezing to death with your intact gear instead. Commanders faced grim choices. Use up the last of the firewood now and risk tomorrow, or ration the heat and watch men die by morning. There's debate about how disciplined these decisions really were. Some historians argue that firewood was carefully distributed by rank, by role, by need. Others say it was chaos, that in the end it always came down to who could swing a hatchet fastest or lie closest to the guy who could. You stare at the pitiful flicker in front of you, nose dripping, toes numb. A tiny flame licks at the edge of a broken spear shaft someone donated to the fire. You know it won't last, none of it will. Already the smoke is rising thinner. Someone tries to blow on the embers and nearly passes out from the effort. So you sit there, hands out, hoping for a spark, just one, enough to get you through the night. But if it doesn't come, you'll do what soldiers always do in these mountains. You'll curl into yourself like a dying animal, wrap your cloak as tight as it will go, and wait. Not for morning, just for less pain. It starts as a low hum behind you. At first, you think it's your ears ringing again, the kind of constant background noise the cold brings on, the buzzing of frozen blood struggling to move. But then it rises, slow and steady, wobbling on the edge of something that shouldn't be cheerful. A long, droning note that quivers through the trees, startling a nearby mule so badly it kicks over a pot of snow water. Someone mutters, "Oh no, not again." You turn, squinting through the mist, and there he is. That one guy, the one with the bagpipes. You don't know his real name. Maybe he doesn't have one anymore. People just call him Piper, sometimes with affection, sometimes with the kind of resignation normally reserved for blisters and hardtack. He's wrapped in a patchwork cloak made of mismatched furs and old battle standards, and the instrument, God help us all, is tucked under his arm like it's the last sacred relic of a forgotten kingdom. And he's playing. It's not bad, necessarily. In fact, if you weren't knee-deep in a snowdrift with a sore shoulder and possible trench foot, you might almost call it haunting. A low, eerie tune, half lullaby and half war cry, echoing faintly through the pines. The kind of melody that makes you feel like you're in a legend, but one where everyone dies at the end. Still, it's something. Something that isn't moaning wind or the rattle of your own teeth. Something human, because music, even down weird mountain bagpipe music, has a purpose out here. You glance around and notice heads lifting. A few soldiers turn toward the sound. Some smile, actual smiles, the real kind, not the half-cracked grimaces people wear when their cloaks freeze to their armour. Even the mules seem to calm down. One of them lets out a snort that might have been in tune. You can't be sure. The song continues, long and slow, swelling up through the trees like breath in frozen lungs. In a strange way it works. There's something about rhythm, even a slow, slightly off-key one, that binds people together. A pulse, a pace, and when you're trudging through snow so deep it pulls your boots off, sometimes that's all you have left. Just the beat, just the noise. Historically, music served a critical, if often overlooked, role in medieval armies. Not just in battle, where drums and horns directed troops through the chaos, but during marches, especially long ones. Bagpipes, drums, flutes, even crude stringed instruments were carried by designated musicians, or just by bored soldiers who couldn't stand the silence. There are even accounts of commanders demanding music during the worst days of the march, not for morale, but for discipline. If they can still play, they can still move, one was quoted as saying, as if melody could outrun Frostbite. Maybe it can. Maybe it just gives it a soundtrack. Fringe historians have even debated the idea of psychological warfare via music during winter campaigns. Not necessarily the dramatic horn blasts you hear in movies, but subtle sounds, whistles, moans, distant drums, used to make enemies believe they were being surrounded in the snow, to unsettle them when visibility was low and nerves were fraying. Whether it worked is unclear, but fear amplified by echoing pipes in the dark. Yeah, that would mess with your head. You pull your cloak tighter as the song changes, taking on a brighter edge now, something vaguely cheerful, if only because it's not completely depressing. A few soldiers start clapping along, barely audible under gloves and numb hands, but still. Movement, response, life. Then, incredibly, one of the younger guys starts singing. You blink. Yep, singing. His voice cracks on the second line and someone hisses, "No!" like he's just knocked over the last pot of stew, but he pushes on, then another joins, then another. The lyrics don't make much sense. Something about a fat innkeeper, goat in a tree, and trousers gone missing during a feast. Classic. No one cares. It's warm in a way, not in the fingers or the toes, but somewhere under the ribs, where it's been cold for weeks. You don't join in, not because you don't want to, but because your throat's sore and you're pretty sure your singing voice sounds like a dying chimney. But you hum just a little, and for one fleeting moment it feels like you're somewhere else. A tavern, maybe. A wedding. A firelit hall with laughter and ale and roast meat instead of oats and gristle. It's not real, but it doesn't have to be. The song winds down slowly, Piper's last note stretching long and mournful into the frost. Then silence, a few grunts, a chuckle. Someone throws him a hunk of bread as thanks, and he bows theatrically. It's probably frozen, but it's still more than he had. Then someone whispers, "Keep it going," and they do. Another song, this one darker, slower. A song about home, a song you've heard your father hum while fixing harnesses in the stable. That one gets you, right in the chest. You swallow hard and look away from the fire so no one sees your face. Not every army had a piper, but the ones that did remembered them long after the campaign ended. The music lingered longer than the frostbite scars, the nightmares, the names of the fallen. It became part of the memory, part of the myth. There's still scholarly debate over just how important musicians were during campaigns like this. Some dismiss them as morale fluff, nothing vital. Others argue that in a world without radios, without clocks, without structure beyond what the body could remember, a song was the only anchor, and in the cold, an anchor could be everything. Eventually the singing fades. One by one, the soldiers slip back into their blankets, huddled against the dark. Piper packs up his instrument carefully, wrapping it in a scrap of old banner and tucking it beneath his cloak like a child. He finds a place near the fire and closes his eyes, breathing in that little echo of warmth his music brought him. You lie down and pull your blanket over your face, the tune still buzzing behind your ears. Not a lullaby, not really, but enough to remind you that you're still human, still marching, still here, for now. Leadership looks different when everyone's half dead. Gone are the booming speeches and the proud rides down the ranks on armoured horses. Now it's more of a grim nod, a half grunt, boom, and the occasional barked order that's muffled by a scarf and delivered with frost clinging to a moustache. The commander doesn't ride anymore. His horse slipped 2 days ago, bruised its leg, and is now being dragged along like the world's saddest wheelbarrow. He walks like the rest of you now, stiff-legged and squinting, cloak wrapped high around his chin, or is chewing something you suspect might just be frozen leather. Every army has one. The leader. That single figure you're all supposed to believe knows where you're going and how to get there without becoming a snowman. Your commander, Sir Anselm of wherever it was warmer, isn't a bad man, just a tired one. His armour's been mostly replaced with furs and layers, but he keeps the steel breastplate strapped over his chest like a badge of authority. No one's told him it's been dented into the shape of a lopsided pancake. That might break the illusion. He rides near the front when he can, flanked by 2 equally miserable-looking lieutenants who spend most of their time arguing over whether the maps are upside down. The maps, by the way, are laughably useless at this point. They were designed for summer, sunny passes, flowing streams, friendly markers, not the unrecognisable snow-choked valleys and avalanche-prone ridges you're currently navigating by gut feeling, and what can only be described as deeply wishful thinking. Leadership, it turns out, has less to do with making decisions and more to do with convincing the rest of you to keep moving, especially now with morale melting faster than body heat in wet wool. The commander's main tool isn't strategy, it's momentum, just enough to keep the column dragging itself 1 foot forward hour after hour, pretending this isn't a walking funeral procession. You remember the first days of the march when Sir Anselm rode tall, voice ringing over the snowdrifts like a trumpet. "We'll take the pass by week's end," he'd declared. "They won't expect us to come through the mountains." Well, he was half right. No one expected it, least of all the soldiers doing the climbing. Back then you believed in him, or at least in the way he looked when he pointed dramatically at the horizon. Now he just points vaguely upward and mumbles things like, "We need to find that ridge," even though every direction looks like a ridge and none of them look friendly. And when to stop. That's the cruelest decision. March too long and people collapse in the snow. Stop too early and the cold sinks into your bones before you've even made camp. Every day is a gamble, pace versus preservation. A slower march means fewer frostbitten feet, but it also means fewer supplies by the time you actually get to wherever you're going, if that place even exists anymore. Some soldiers are starting to doubt it. You've heard whispers. This isn't a route, it's a punishment. The commander doesn't sleep much anymore. You've seen him pacing long after the fires have died, muttering to himself, eyes flicking between the stars and the white slope ahead like he's looking for divine directions. He talks less, but listens more. You notice how he lingers near the injured, checks the mules, offers quiet words to the young ones shaking in their cloaks. It's not flashy, it's not heroic, but it's something. One morning he halts the column early, just after midday. That sends up a wave of confusion. It's not like him. But the snow's deep, the sky's darkening, and more than a few men are limping now. One collapsed an hour ago and had to be dragged on a sled. Maybe Sir Anselm's finally learned that living soldiers make better warriors than frozen ones. That night he walks among the tents, such as they are. He stops near yours, crouches down by the little fire you've coaxed into existence, and just sits for a minute. You and your companions don't say much. You don't need to. The silence is easier than conversation. Then he asks so softly it almost gets lost in the wind. "What's your name again?" You tell him. He nods. "You marched well today." It's nothing, just words, but it's more than you've heard in days, and suddenly the fire feels a bit warmer, not much, just enough. There's a debate among scholars about the effectiveness of medieval command structures during winter campaigns. Some argue that centralised leadership, rigid hierarchies, top-down orders was ill-suited to the fluid, chaotic nature of mountain marches. Others claim that discipline was the only thing that kept armies together, and that charismatic leaders like Sir Anselm, or, the lucky few who survived, were the glue holding civilization together at 10,000 feet. Then there's the fringe theory, that the real leaders weren't commanders at all, but the quiet ones, the sergeants who knew how to strap snowshoes, the veterans who could smell an avalanche, the cooks who managed to stretch a pot of gruel into something edible, the ones no one wrote poems about, but whose absence could sink an army faster than a cavalry charge. You're starting to believe that one. The next day, the commander makes another change. Instead of pushing for the summit like he'd planned, he orders a detour, a lower route along the eastern edge of the range, longer but safer. It's a gamble. The scouts aren't sure if the path is even passable this late in the season. But it's clear he's not willing to keep losing men just to shave a day off the journey. Not everyone agrees. Some grumble that it's weakness, that he's lost his edge. But you see the way he walks now, leaning on her broken spear used as a cane, boots soaked through, beard rimmed with frost. He's not weak. He's just not pretending this is winnable by bravado alone. He's adapting. And out here, that's more valuable than glory. At this point, you're not even sure which direction you're facing. East, west, up, down, it all blends together into a spinning blur of snow, fog and tree trunks that seem to lean the wrong way no matter where you turn. And the sun? Forget it. The sun is just a rumour now, some vague yellow myth you tell the younger soldiers to keep them from crying. There's no light to follow, no stars to steer by. Only the same blinding whiteness every way you look. Welcome to mountain blindness. Not just snow blindness, that comes later. But the creeping, itchy uncertainty that builds up in your gut when you realise you've been walking for hours and haven't the faintest clue where you are. or whether you're still going the right way. You'd think the cold would be your biggest enemy. But out here, disorientation is its own kind of killer. The path, such as it is, has vanished again. The snow filled it in overnight, leaving only the faint memory of tracks, lines that might be from boots or hooves, or maybe just wind-carving ridges into the drifts. You've followed the wrong trail twice already this morning, only to backtrack an hour later when it dead-ended into a thicket of pine branches that looked navigable from afar but turned out to be a natural snare of ice-covered limbs and moose droppings. And still, you march, because the column moves, and if you fall behind, you might as well lie down and save everyone the trouble of watching you go. Scouts are ahead again, 3 of them this time, moving in different directions like hesitant feelers. They'll disappear into the snow, then reappear as silhouettes, or not at all. That's just how it works now. You lose one every couple of days. One walked off into a ravine, another slipped in a snowstorm and wasn't found until 2 days later, buried upright, eyes open, hands frozen around a tree trunk like he was hugging it goodbye. Your own sense of direction. Shot. You think you're climbing, maybe? The wind is stronger. Your ears hurt from the pressure, and the air feels thinner, like you're sucking on cold gauze instead of breathing. That usually means you're gaining altitude. But then again, you could just be getting weaker. There's a moment, just a blink, when you realise you don't know where the rest of your unit is. You look around and no one. Not a single familiar cloak. Not a hoof print. Not a voice. Panic hits like a wave of hot water in a frozen bath. You spin trying to orient yourself, but everything's the same. Trees? No. Fog? You shout once, nothing. Then again. Finally, a voice returns. Distant, muffled but enough. You stumble toward it, boots catching on the roots and hidden rocks, until at last you break through a small clump of pines and see the fire ahead. Lesson learned. Never wander more than 10 feet from the man in front of you, no matter how badly you need to pee, and even when you can see, snow blindness is lurking in the background, waiting for your eyeballs to give up. You've started squinting all the time now, pulling your hood down low and wrapping fabric around your face. Not because of cold, it's because the white glare is like staring into a boiling sheet of glass. The light bounces up from the snow, hits your eyes from below, and turns everything into a blur. You've seen guys lose their sight for a day, or 2, sometimes longer. It starts with a headache, then dry eyes, then a film of white fuzz that just won't go away. No real cure except to rest in the dark, which, out here, is the same as being dead weight. One man walks with his hand on another's shoulder now. His vision hasn't come back yet. They move slowly, like dancers in a sad cold play. You overheard them whispering about wolves last night. Neither of them slept. Historically, armies had few ways to prevent snow blindness. Some used strips of cloth with tiny slits cut into them, worn over the eyes like makeshift goggles. Others relied on soot or charcoal smudged beneath the eyelids to reduce glare. You tried that once, burned the end of a stick, rubbed it under your brows. It helped, a little, until the tears froze your lashes together. There's debate among historians about just how effective those remedies were. Some argue that snow blindness was simply inevitable on long marches, that it was built into the attrition rate, like hunger or illness. Others believe that seasoned commanders had ways to rotate soldiers, protect eyes, and navigate based on terrain memory, tree patterns, even the direction moss grew on rocks. That last one doesn't work here. Everything's covered in snow, and moss is dead. You've taken to using your own tricks, counting steps between landmarks, marking trees with knife scratches, whispering your direction under your breath like a prayer. North, ridge, left of the bent tree, over and over, like a spell to keep your legs moving. But even that slips. Today, you caught yourself walking in a full circle. You only realised when you passed a pine with 3 broken branches, exactly the same as the one you saw 20 minutes earlier. You laughed. It wasn't funny. It's the mental toll that hits hardest. When you don't know where you are, you start questioning everything. Time, memory, the names of the people around you. You're not just lost in the woods, you're lost in your head. And no one talks about that. Not in camp, not aloud. They just glance around more, walk a little closer to each other. You notice them starting to tie their belts together while sleeping, or trail a rope between the tents so no one wanders off into the dark. That's how you know things are getting bad. There's a story passed around like a superstition about a knight who vanished during a blizzard. They found him day later in a clearing only a few hundred feet from camp. He'd stripped off all his armour, laid down his sword like it was a bedpost, and curled up peacefully in the snow, face turned toward the rising sun. Except the sun hadn't risen in days, and his eyes had turned pure white. Some say he'd gone snowblind. Others say the mountain had whispered to him. You try not to think about it. Instead, you squint ahead through the snow, searching for movement, colour, anything that isn't white or grey. There, just a flicker, a cloak flapping, a banner bobbing. You adjust your course and fall back in line, grateful not to be alone again. For now, at least, you're still going in some direction. Even if it's the wrong one, it starts with a distant crack. Sharp, clean and sudden. You freeze mid-step, 1 foot sunk deep into a drift, head tilted like a deer who just realised something is horribly wrong. The others around you stop too. No words, just shared silence. Ears turned, eyes scanning the slopes above. Then another sound, lower this time. A rumble. Not thunder. Not wind. Something heavier. Something moving. Someone whispers, "Avalanche." No one runs. There's nowhere to run. The trail is a narrow thread of trampled snow clinging to the side of the mountain, barely wide enough for a mule to pass without slipping into the abyss below. One side is a steep drop into a tree-choked ravine, the other is a towering slope of jagged rock and unstable snowpack. Leaning overhead like a loaded spring, the rumble dies down, nothing falls, not yet. But now every breath feels like a risk. You move slowly, deliberately. Each footstep is deliberate, planted like you're tiptoeing across the back of a sleeping dragon. The men around you mirror your caution, eyes flicking upwards every few seconds, watching for that telltale cloud of powder that signals the beginning of the end. The terrain has turned hostile, not just inconvenient, but actively angry. This isn't just about snow anymore, this is about a mountain that's tired of being walked on. The slope above you is covered in cornices, overhangs of wind-packed snow that look like they belong on a frozen wave. One gust, one echo, one misplaced step, and the whole thing could come down in a white roar. A few soldiers try to walk on the far edge of the trail, hugging the cliff wall, as if pressing themselves flat might make them invisible to gravity. It doesn't help. An hour later, the path narrows again, bending around a rock outcrop slick with ice. One of the younger soldiers slips, catches himself, but sends a spray of snow tumbling down the side. It vanishes in seconds, swallowed by the trees below. Everyone freezes, waits. Nothing. A few start breathing again, a few don't. You inch forward, following the figure ahead of you, keeping your pace even, light. You feel the weight of your pack pulling you backward and shift your stance slightly to stay upright. Your thighs burn, your calves are stone. Every step is an act of balance and faith. And then it happens. A deafening crack, louder than before. Not snow this time. Rock. You look up and see it, a chunk of cliff dislodged by a freeze-thaw cycle and sheer bad timing, tumbling down like a judgment. It misses the main path, thankfully, but slams into a mule on the lower trail. The animal shrieks, high and awful, and collapses, legs twitching, cargo spilling across the snow like broken teeth. Chaos erupts. Men scatter, some slipping, some shouting, others frozen in place as more rocks rain down. Smaller this time, clattering like hail on the frozen ground. One strikes a soldier's helmet and knocks him over. He doesn't get up. No avalanche, not yet, but you feel the mountain shift. A subtle, malevolent lurch beneath your feet. The commanders yell for silence. Absolute bans. It takes time, but eventually the panic simmers down. The wounded are dragged off the path. The mule is, well, it's no longer your problem. You continue on, quieter now. Even the clinking of weapons and the creaking of leather has stopped. You walk like ghosts. Historically, avalanche deaths in medieval campaigns were underreported, not because they didn't happen, but because no one wanted to admit how often entire squads vanished under snow. The terrain was blamed, or the enemy. But the truth? The truth was that mountains are worse than armies. They don't take sides, they just kill indiscriminately. There's an old superstition whispered among mountain folk. The mountain remembers the weight of every step. Too many feet in one day, too much noise, too much arrogance. That's when it punishes. You think about that as you pass the wreckage of the fallen mule, the broken crate of grain scattered like seeds, the twisted leather straps, the body half buried already. Fringe theories among scholars even suggest some medieval commanders avoided mountain paths not for tactical reasons, but out of fear. Fear of terrain cursed by old gods, fear of routes known for disappearances. Not every decision was based on logistics. Sometimes it was dread. Tonight, camp is set up on a narrow plateau just wide enough for a few fires and some bedraggled tents. The wind cuts across it sideways, and the cliffs above loom darker than the sky itself. No one sleeps well. You lie down with your sword still buckled to your hip, one boot half off, the other still on in case you have to run. If running is even an option, you hear whispers in the night. Not voices, just snow shifting, trees groaning under their weight, wind moving the mountain's furniture. But you imagine words in them anyway, and dreams, forget it. Your mind replays the rockfall again and again, the scream of the mule, the cracking of bones beneath snow, and the sudden awful knowledge that you're not safe, not even when you're not fighting, not even when you're still. The mountain doesn't care about your cause, your banner, your orders. It just waits for the right moment to remind you who really owns this place. And in the morning, it almost does. Another small slide hits the upper ridge during breakfast. No one's caught in it, but it buries the fire pit and half of a tent. The man who owned it just shrugs and eats snow for breakfast. It's the most enthusiasm anyone's shown in days. Still, that's your cue. Camp is torn down faster than usual. The mood is tense, frantic, but quiet. You're not marching through the mountains anymore. You're sneaking. Because now you understand the mountain isn't a battlefield, it's the enemy. The parchment cracks as you unfold it. Edges brittle from the cold, ink smudged where damp fingers tried to hold it steady. You didn't write it today. You didn't write it yesterday either. It's been sitting in your satchel for nearly a week now, unfinished, folded 3 times and tucked behind a damp strip of jerky and a handful of pine needles you were planning to boil into tea. You keep trying to write home, to say something, but every time you put quill to paper the words come out wrong, or worse, nothing comes out at all. So now you sit near a smouldering fire, knees pulled up, parchment resting on one thigh, and finally let the words spill, slowly, stiffly, like thawing joints. Mother, we've made it past the first ridge. The snow is deep and cruel. I think my boots hate me. It's a terrible letter. You know that. Nothing in it sounds brave or comforting. You're not even trying to hide how miserable you are. There's a smear where your fingers shook while writing Frostbite. It's not dramatic, it's just the truth. Letter writing on a winter march is a strange act of optimism. You're not sure how or when this will ever reach anyone. But you write anyway, because for a moment, it makes you feel like you still exist beyond this place. That there's a version of you somewhere else, sitting in a warm room, by a fire that doesn't blow sideways, telling stories of this march from a safe distance. You're not the only one doing it. All around the camp, others scribble by firelight or scratch against their shields. One man carves his message into a wooden spoon, pressing each letter like it might outlive him. Another dictates to his friend, half because he's illiterate, half because his fingers are wrapped in so many rags he can't bend them anymore. Some of the letters are hopeful, even cheery, full of promises and don't worry about me bravado. Others are plain bleak. There's no censor on this mountain, no one to read and cross out the parts that reveal too much. Here, if you want to tell your sister that your foot is rotting off and you might lose it by next week, you do. If you want to tell your lover that you've started dreaming of warm bread and nothing else, you can. One guy writes to his dog, not joking, signs it your boy, and scratches behind his ear after finishing, like the dog might feel it from leagues away. You ask a passing squire where the letters go. He just shrugs. Maybe the next supply caravan, he says. Maybe no place at all. Then he adds, write it anyway. It helps. You know what he means, because when you're halfway up a mountain in a winter that feels biblical, a letter is one of the last things you have that still belongs to you. Not your orders, not your ration pack, not your freezing cloak that used to be brown but is now just mountain grey. But your words, still yours. Historically, letter writing during campaigns was rare, but not unheard of. Nobles and officers wrote more often, of course, but even foot soldiers found ways to send messages, whether through military scribes or just fellow travellers heading home. Parchment was scarce, ink even scarcer. Charcoal and scraps of cloth often stood in. A burnt stick and a bit of canvas could say everything that needed saying. Still alive, send boots. Tell father I forgive him. Some letters were never meant to be sent. They were written, folded, and tucked into belts or shoes or sewn into tunics. Found later by accident on bodies in abandoned packs under tent floors. Scholars argue about the intent behind those. Were they practice? Prayers? or just last confessions too painful to speak aloud. Fringe historians even speculate that entire collections of unsent letters travelled with armies, forming a kind of mobile, silent library of grief and longing. Notes written to the dead, to unborn children, to homes that may no longer exist. You think about that as you fold your own. You've written 4 letters since the march began. All to your mother. She lives in a small village far from the front lines, and you imagine her by the hearth, knitting with fingers as stiff as yours, muttering about your poor choices in life. You don't tell her everything. You don't write about the man who froze to death 2 nights ago, or the wolves, or the way the commander now mumbles in his sleep. But you tell her you're still walking. That's enough. Tonight you try again. The fire flickers low, casting more smoke than light, but you lean close and start a new one. You don't write a greeting this time, you just begin. I dreamed last night of green things, trees with leaves, a field with mud that isn't frozen, the smell of horses in the spring. I woke up crying and lied about it. You pause, your hand shakes, then you keep writing, because someone needs to know what this was like. Not just the battles, not the glory, not the flags and charges and triumphs, but this, the slow, hungry trudge, the tent collapsing under snow, the silence after a fall, the man who gave his blanket to a dying friend and didn't wake up himself. No one writes songs about this part, but maybe they should. You finish the letter with your name, just your name, nothing more. You don't seal it. You don't even fold it. You slide it into your satchel and pray that if your body falls into the snow tomorrow, someone finds it, someone reads it, someone remembers. Then you lie back, staring at the dark ceiling of your makeshift tent, and wonder how many other soldiers are writing by candlelight right now. How many last words are being written in firelight by hands that may not see another sunrise? It's not much, but it's what you have. And out here, in the endless white, a letter might just be the warmest thing you carry. They don't wear armour. Most don't even carry weapons. Some have shoes that are more holes than leather, and yet there they are, marching just like you, in the same snow, through the same cold, shouldering burdens that would flatten a pack mule. These are the ones history almost always forgets. The camp followers, not soldiers, not quite civilians either. They exist in that strange in-between, trailing the army like ghosts with jobs. And when the real suffering starts, when the snow turns to ice and the food turns to memory, they're often the ones holding everything together with numb fingers and zero glory. There's the cook's boy, dragging a pot that probably hasn't been scrubbed since your army left home. There's the washerwoman who's somehow kept track of 4 different sets of undertunics while trudging up a mountain with only one hand covered in cloth. And there's the smith's apprentice who looks about 14 and already has more scars than your captain. And then there's the old woman with the cart, no one knows her name. She's just always been there, wrapped in layers of patchwork cloth, face hidden under a hood, hunched and slow-moving but always moving. The cart she pulls isn't even on wheels anymore, those snapped off days ago, so now it just scrapes along the snow loaded with gods know what. Bandages, pots, rope, maybe pieces of old armour. Once someone said they saw her pull out a bottle of wine. That guy now shares her tea every night like they're best friends. You didn't think much of these people at first, just extra mouths to feed, dead weight. But now, you're starting to understand, without them, this whole miserable procession would have collapsed days ago. When the fires fail, it's the followers who scavenge for wood. When someone collapses, it's the followers who fetch water, dig out blankets, whisper prayers you don't understand. They're not soldiers, but they've buried more soldiers than anyone else. One night, your unit's cook, an ex-baker with a bad leg and worse attitude, burns himself trying to melt snow in a cracked cauldron. It's the camp followers who show up first. The cart woman gives him a poultice that smells like mouldy rosemary and something vaguely like horse, but the next day he's walking again, limping but walking. No one questions it. Historically, camp followers were essential but often marginalised. They were the cooks, medics, blacksmiths, sutlers, washerwomen, and yes, sometimes unofficial consorts. They travelled with the baggage train, tended fires, sewed torn cloaks, bandaged wounds, helped carry supplies, and, when things got desperate, fought too. But because they didn't wear uniforms or carry banners, they vanished from most official records. Armies counted soldiers. They rarely counted the people who kept those soldiers alive. There's a debate still ongoing about whether camp followers were official. Some historians argue that medieval commanders accepted their presence as a necessary part of campaign life, even issuing them ration allowances or assigning them roles. Others insist they were treated as little more than tolerated parasites, exploited when useful, discarded when inconvenient. You watch a teenage girl boil pine bark into tea for a man with a hacking cough. She hums to herself as she works. It's the only music in camp that night. She's not wearing gloves. You offer her yours. She smiles, shakes her head, and keeps stirring. The cold doesn't discriminate, but the army does. There's an invisible line between the fighters and the followers. When food runs low, it's the followers who eat last, if at all. When space around the fire grows scarce, they're pushed to the edges, pressed into the shadows. You've started noticing how many of them sleep wrapped around each other like sacks of laundry, sharing what little body heat they have. You'd feel pity if they didn't carry themselves with more grit than most of the men in your own squad. Fringe stories circulate as they always do. There's a tale about a woman, no one agrees on her name, who carried a wounded knight on her back for 2 days through snow and sleet after he broke his leg during a river crossing. When they arrived at camp, she dropped him at the commander's feet, muttered, "He's yours," and walked away without waiting for thanks. Others say she disappeared that night, leaving behind a pair of boots that weren't hers. You think about that every time you see the cart woman. She doesn't speak much, but she always seems to know where she's needed most. Last night, she lit a fire before anyone else. Tonight she fixed a torn boot for a man too proud to ask. Sometimes you wonder if she's even mortal. Then you see her muttering curses when her ladle freezes solid, and remember she's just old, cold, and deeply tired, like the rest of you. Still, some soldiers scoff. "They're slowing us down," one says, kicking snow off his cloak. "Dead weight." But he's the same one who lined up first when the followers started handing out warm broth the next morning. He doesn't say thank you. Most don't. But a few of you are starting to notice, starting to help. When one of the smaller children starts coughing, a knight donates his scarf. When the baker's boy collapses, another soldier gives up his portion of dried meat without a word. It's not kindness exactly, it's survival, because whether you wear a helmet or a bonnet, whether you carry a spear or a pot, everyone is suffering now. And out here in the shadow of the peaks, it's the invisible hands that hold the army together. Quiet strength, quiet care, no glory, no stories, but they are still marching, just like you. You wait until nightfall before addressing the problem, because frankly no one wants to talk about it in daylight. It's the kind of subject that gets avoided at all costs, until someone nearly steps in it. Or until it freezes in the wrong place and becomes a hazard, or until the smell creeps in under your blanket and makes you wonder if your soul has taken up rotting. Let's talk about the latrines, or rather the complete frozen disaster that used to be the latrines. When the march started, there were rules. Dug pits, marked with stakes, a rotation system, sanitary standards, they called it, as if a shovel and some privacy curtains could keep disease at bay. That was back when dirt still existed. Now, it's all snow and ice. Digging a proper hole is like trying to tunnel through marble with a wooden spoon. And by now, the snow is so packed and trampled that anything you bury will be preserved perfectly until some future archaeologist uncovers it and writes a paper called The Great Winter Cesspool Incident of 1347. So instead, people do what they can. Some walk a little farther from camp, behind trees or rocks, clutching their cloaks around them and trying not to think about frostbite in delicate places. Others get lazy, or sick, or both. And that's when the problem really starts. You've stepped in it. Everyone has. It's almost a rite of passage. That slow, squishy realization that what just stuck to your boot isn't mud, and the panicked dance that follows as you try to scrape it off with a stick that breaks halfway through. A nearby soldier offers you snow, not help. Just snow, you use it. One man tried to melt snow to flush out a small trench he made behind his tent. It froze again in under 20 minutes, trapping a half-formed turd like an ancient mosquito in amber. It's still there, glinting under the torchlight like something sent to mock your dignity. And that's the thing, dignity is long gone. By now, no one even flinches when someone squats a few feet away. You just look the other direction, pretend the steam rising off their exposed buttocks is your imagination, and wait for the wind to shift. Historically, armies struggled hard with sanitation in the cold. Human waste froze quickly, sure, but that didn't mean it stopped being dangerous. Latrines became slippery death traps. Digging new ones became nearly impossible without proper tools, and who wants to carry a spade when you're already hauling 40 pounds of damp wool and regrets? So instead, they improvised. Some dug shallow snow trenches with their boots. Others defecated into bags or buckets and dumped the contents off cliffs or into ravines. You've seen someone do that, tossing a slop bucket into the woods with a prayer that the gods of downhill wind are feeling merciful. They weren't. The stench drifted back over the camp like an airborne omen. And then, of course, there's the disease. At first, it was just a few cases. Loose bowels, bad stew probably, too much cold ale. But then more started complaining. Nausea, fever, dehydration. You know it's dysentery, everyone does. But no one wants to say it out loud, because saying it makes it real. And real means people will start dying in puddles of their own filth. Slowly, miserably, quietly. Not from a battle. Not even from exposure. Just from poor hygiene and the wrong piece of meat. One man didn't even make it out of his tent. His companions discovered him the next morning, curled up in his blanket with blood on his thighs and flies already settling on the edge of his tongue. In winter. That's how bad the smell was, even flies found a way. The medic shakes his head and starts boiling vinegar in a pan. That's the solution. Or one of them. You're not sure. You just know the air now smells like pickles and death. There's a fringe belief among the camp followers that keeping lavender in your shoes prevents illness. No one questions it. If someone handed you a bucket of warm rat droppings and promised it cured bowel rot, you'd probably chug it with a toast. Desperation smells like, well, you know what it smells like. And what about privacy? Ha! That's gone too. You try to wait until darkness falls, or at least until the snow flurries thicken, to handle your business. But even then you feel exposed. Cold wind sneaks up your cloak like a cruel joke and everything shrinks from fear and frost. You've learned to be fast, efficient, emotionless. The best latrine experience is the one you never think about again. Some officers still try to enforce rules. Designated areas, they bark, pointing to half-buried flags flapping in the wind. Sanitary zones, someone wrote on a post, long since snapped in half by a falling branch. But no one listens, not really. When it's 20 below and your stomach is cramping, you go where you have to go, even if that means next to a rock where you once saw a man pray. That rock's seen things. Scholars still debate how medieval armies avoided total biological collapse during these marches. Some argue that the cold slowed the spread of bacteria. Others say the constant movement prevented build-up. But you know the truth, it wasn't science, it was sheer unhinged luck. And yours might be running out. A few of the soldiers have started building makeshift wooden platforms, latrine seats hammered together from shield scraps and broken crates, elevated slightly off the snow. They call it the throne. It's awful, but it's better than squatting over a hole that's already refrozen over like a glass jar of shame. Tonight you hold it in. It's not worth the cold, not worth the trek to the edge of camp where the latrine area has become a minefield of half-covered tragedies. You lie on your side, blanket pulled up, trying to sleep through the ache in your gut. You whisper to your stomach, beg it. Negotiate. It grumbles back. The battle continues, and tomorrow, you know, the first thing you'll have to do, before walking, before eating, before singing along to the piper's morning wheeze, is figure out where to go and how not to fall in. Because here, on this freezing, filthy mountain, the most dangerous step might be the one you take in the dark that you see right into someone else's mistake. You hear it before you see it. Somewhere in the clatter of morning gear and half-hearted marching there's a distinct slosh, then a pop, then a cheer. A small one, but unmistakable. You glance to your right and see 3 soldiers hunched around a battered cask of something that clearly isn't melted snow or boiled bark tea. One of them holds up a dented tin mug, steam rising faintly, and passes it to the next with all the reverence of a priest offering communion. You already know what it is. Beer. Not the crisp-chilled stuff you dreamers about on warm summer evenings. No golden pints with foamy heads and roasted barley undertones. No tavern music in the background. No wooden benches polished smooth by generations of elbows and elbows' regrets. This is survival beer. Cloudy, sour, warmish if you're lucky. Frozen into slush if you're not. And still it might be the most precious thing in camp. You make your way over slowly, boots dragging through the snow, not too eager, but definitely interested. One of the men sees you, raises the mug like a peace offering. No words are exchanged. You sit down beside them and wait your turn. That's the rule now. No begging, no questions, just sit, share. It reaches you eventually. Lukewarm, heavy with sediment, and tinged with something you hope is just old wood from the barrel. You take a sip, and it stings all the way down. Not bad, you've drunk worse. Last week you tried to melt pine sap into tea. You still have regrets. This is civilization. Medieval armies rarely went far without some form of alcohol. Beer, ale, mead or wine, depending on region, budget and what hadn't spoiled yet. It wasn't just a luxury, it was a critical piece of the logistics plan. Alcohol didn't freeze as easily, kept longer than water, and, more importantly, it killed things water didn't. Bacteria mostly. And maybe, just maybe, the creeping dread in your gut that came with being 30 miles deep into hostile, frozen wilderness with no idea what day it was. Some commanders rationed it carefully, keeping it for feasts, morale boosts, or the kind of diplomacy that happened around fires instead of swords. Others distributed it daily, usually weak, grainy ale barely strong enough to count, but enough to make men a little looser, a little warmer, a little more willing to march one more hour in the cold. Yours. He's stingy, probably smart, but no fun. So when ale shows up like this, some smuggled keg stashed in a wagon, and cracked open quietly under cover of snow, it's more than a drink, it's a moment. Fringe theories even claim that some units carried barrels labelled as equipment that were in fact portable breweries, primitive setups for fermenting mash as they travelled. Dubious? Maybe, but you've seen stranger things survive this march? Like the guy who packed a harp. Still hasn't played it. You assume he's saving it for when someone dies dramatically. Back in your little circle, the beer keeps flowing. One mug, passed carefully, no hoarding, one sip at a time. You notice how the mood changes. Shoulders drop, voices soften. Someone even laughs, a real one, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep and unexpected. It startles everyone into silence for a second, like laughter's something we're not allowed to have anymore. But then someone else laughs too, and the moment stretches. The beer warms your belly. Not enough to shake the cold entirely, but just enough to bring your fingers back to life. You rub your hands together, exhale, and for a second, everything feels less impossible. There's a guy in your unit. Nobody knows his real name, but everyone calls him Keg. He's built like a barrel, red-nosed from years of drinking and shouting, and he swears up and down that beer saved his life more than once. I once crawled through 3 days of blizzard, he says, with nothing but a flask of mead and a broken toe, drank one, used the other as a compass. You don't ask him to explain, you just let him talk. That's another gift of alcohol out here. The stories start flowing again. The old ones, the tall ones. Someone tells a tale about a winter skirmish where the enemy slipped on a spilled keg, lost formation, and was routed. You're almost sure it's a lie. Doesn't matter. Because beer out here isn't just a drink. It's memory. It's warmth. It's rebellion. And make no mistake, there's something deeply rebellious about sitting in the middle of a mountain pass with your nose red from the cold and your heart thumping like a half-frozen drum and deciding to smile anyway. To pass around a mug and laugh at nothing, because otherwise you'll cry at everything. You take another sip. The mug is lighter now, nearly empty. When it comes back to the first man, he tips it, frowns, then taps the cask. Hollow. Gone. No one complains. Instead, you all sit for a few more minutes, letting the last warmth settle into your bones. Then wordlessly the circle breaks. Each man stands, stretches, and begins the so weary process of getting ready to move again. But everything feels a little different. No one walks quite as hunched. The cold hasn't gone, but for now, you're not quite as bitter about it. You see Piper adjusting his bagpipes and muttering to himself. Even he looks less gloomy. A miracle. Later you hear that the keg was part of a wedding dowry, confiscated from a local village months ago and forgotten in a supply cart under sacks of oats. No one knows who found it, no one's confessing. But a few soldiers have started patting the sides of every barrel they pass, just in case. You go to sleep that night with a warm stomach and sore legs. The cold still creeps under your blanket, of course, but you smile before drifting off just a little. Because beer won't win the war, it won't stop the snow or the wolves or the frostbite crawling up your toes, but for one evening, it reminded you of who you were before all this started, and that's enough. It begins with a sound that doesn't belong here. Not the wind, not the creak of frozen leather, or the groan of old snow underfoot. It's a voice, deep, clear, and oddly calm. At first, it barely registers. After all, you've been hearing voices for days, real and imagined. But this one's different. It answers something. And that's when you realise what's happening. You're not alone out here. You're not sure who spots them first. Maybe one of the scouts, maybe someone pulling at a mule sled who just looked up at the right moment, but within minutes. Murmurs ripple through the column like fire-catching dry pine. At the far end of the clearing, through the mist and snow, another column of men is approaching. Another army, or what's left of one. The two groups don't slow at first. They just eye each other across the icy gap, weapons still sheathed, fingers twitching. No banners raised, no horns, just careful silence. You clutch your hilt. So does the man beside you. For a few long seconds, it feels like the world might collapse into chaos. And then someone calls out. Not a threat. Just a question. You from the Eastern Road? And the answer comes back just as plainly. Tried to be. That's it. No arrows, no charges, just two miserable, half-starved groups of humans staring at each other through layers of frostbite. And realising they have the exact same problem, they're still alive. Barely. The other column is smaller than yours, maybe half the size, maybe fewer. Their cloaks are ragged, their boots crusted with ice. One of their sleds has been fashioned from a broken door. A few carry torches, but the rest move like shadows, bundled so thickly it's hard to tell who's armed and who's just bundled in desperation. You don't lower your guard completely, neither do they. But over the next hour, both sides slowly ease toward the centre of the clearing, like wolves testing the idea of not biting each other for once. The commanders meet. Yours, Sir Anselm, approaches with his usual slow, stiff gait, leaning on his makeshift cane. The other leader is younger, thinner, and wearing what might have once been fine armour, though now it's rusted and flaking, more decorative than functional. They talk, quietly, cautiously, and then something remarkable happens. They sit. Not just them. A few soldiers from each side, no weapons drawn and no threats made. Just two miserable bands of marching men deciding that, in this moment, they're too cold and too tired to be enemies. You find a spot near the edge of this makeshift gathering, sitting on your pack and sipping melted snow while listening to the strange, stuttering flow of conversation that starts to bloom. Men compare rations, compare boots. One guy from the other side brags about a miracle potato that lasted 12 days and tasted like ash on day 13. Someone else tells a joke about a bear, a knight, and a ruined pair of trousers. It's not even funny, but you laugh anyway, because the laughter itself is rare enough to be a treasure. Historically, these moments happen more than you'd think. Temporary truces in the worst conditions, winter diplomacy, not official, not even acknowledged most of the time, just quiet decisions made in the cold that maybe fighting wasn't worth the energy that day. Some called them snow truces, others just called it survival. There's a famous and hotly debated example from the Alps, where two rival factions allegedly shared a fire and food for 3 nights during a particularly brutal storm, each promising not to attack until the snow's cleared. Of course, once the weather broke, so did the truce, but for a few nights they sang the same songs and passed the same wine. You wonder if that's what this is. A pause, a breath, no peace, just a recognition that death is easier to find than it should be. Piper shows up, of course. He begins to play, slow and soft, nothing too joyful, just background music for an event no one dares call what it is. The other side has a flutist, skinny man missing an ear, who pulls out his own battered instrument and answers with a tune of his own. Suddenly you're watching a duet, an actual duet, on a mountain, in a war. This must be what the world sounds like when it's not trying to kill you. There's still tension, of course. One man from your side stares too long at a bow on the other. Another reaches for his dagger when someone gets too close to the food stores. But each time someone intervenes. Gently. A hand on the arm, a shake of the head. Not now, not here. One of their men offers you a dried fig. You haven't seen fruit in weeks. You trade him a piece of cured meat that tastes like regret and smoke. Both of you nod. You don't ask names, too dangerous, but you do ask where they came from. South of the pass, he says. Was supposed to flank your line 2 weeks ago. Then the blizzard hit. You nod, understanding. Same storm, buried our signal corps. We've been walking blind ever since. A pause. We lost our surgeon, he says. We lost our tent poles. That's the closest you come to a moment. The sun never appears, but the clouds thin just enough to lighten the sky. The snow eases. A faint breeze carries the scent of something slightly less miserable. You think it might be pine, or just cleaner air. Eventually the commanders rise. There's a small exchange of supplies. Nothing formal, just gestures. An extra blanket here. a map with slightly better handwriting, a wink even. Then wordlessly the groups prepare to part, no speeches, no promises. Just one man shaking another's hand with fingers that barely bend anymore. And then, just like that, both armies begin walking again, one heading west, the other north. No bloodshed, no banners, just tired boots shuffling through the snow. You look back once, just to make sure it really happened. It did. Out here, where the cold turns steel brittle and flesh useless, even a handshake can feel like a miracle. You start noticing it slowly, like the absence of a noise you didn't realise was always there. A missing face in the firelight, a boot print that veers away from the trail and never comes back. No shouting, no farewell. Just a quiet subtraction. Someone's missing. No one says his name right away, that's the new rule. If you don't speak it to people, maybe it's not true yet. Maybe he's just lagging behind, fixing a strap, relieving himself, tying a rag around his foot. But as the hours pass and the roll call gets quieter and the space in the marching line doesn't close, yeah, you know, he's gone, another deserter. Desertion in the mountains is complicated. It's not like the flatlands where you can vanish into a village, burn your tabard, and pretend you're a travelling thatcher. Up here, the only places to disappear into are snow, trees, and your own bad ideas. So when someone breaks from the group, whether at night or mid-march, it's rarely about escape. It's about something else, a surrender maybe, a refusal, or worst of all, hope that the mountain might treat them better alone than the army ever did. And sometimes it does. But most of the time, they vanish. There was a boy 2 days back, couldn't have been more than 16. Quiet. Quick. Good with knots. He cut away from the column during a rest stop, slipped between some pines, and by the time someone noticed he was gone, he'd already left the trail. A few volunteers offered to look for him. The captain refused. Anyone dumb enough to run off in this cold deserves what he finds, he said. You didn't argue. No one did. But that night, around the fire, you watched 2 men pass their rations silently to the boy's closest friend, just in case he came back. He didn't. Deserters fall into categories. You've seen them all. There's the panickers. They wake up gasping in the night and start running without knowing where. You usually find them by morning, if you're lucky. Then there are the drifters. They don't announce anything, just slowly detach. The kind that one day is 3 steps behind you, and the next is a memory with frost on it. And the worst kind, the planners. The ones who wait, who ration secretly, stash bits of gear, memorise the terrain. The ones who leave notes. You found one of those notes once, tucked into the fold of a discarded cloak hanging from a tree branch. It just said, "Not dying for a flag I've never seen." Hard to argue with that. Historically, desertion was both common and deeply feared. Not just by commanders, but by fellow soldiers. Because when someone breaks rank in the middle of a winter march, it does something to the morale. It cracks the illusion that survival is communal, that you're in this together. And suddenly you realise, maybe you're not. Maybe some of you are just waiting for the right moment to disappear. Punishments for desertion varied wildly. In springtime it might mean flogging, branding, execution. In winter, they just stopped looking. Sometimes a commander would make a show of sending a few scouts out, but everyone knew what that was, pageantry. You didn't waste energy on dead men, not when the living still needed to boil snow and count rations, but still, desertion raised questions. Uncomfortable ones. What would it take for you to leave? Not in a blaze of glory, not into defiance, just quietly. One morning you wake up, look around and think, no, not one more step. You think about it more than you'd like to admit. You've mapped the edge of the camp in your mind, where the trees start, where the snow softens, where the light doesn't reach. You've noticed which way the stream flows. You've kept one small satchel separate, packed lighter than the rest. Not because you're planning to leave, of course not. But if you did, you'd know how. You overheard the cartwoman once talking softly to a child huddled under a blanket. She said, "Sometimes people go into the woods when they're done being people. That stuck with you. Some of them do come back, not many, and when they do, it's usually in bad shape. Barefoot, eyes wild, fingers black with frostbite." One man wandered back into camp 5 days after disappearing. He couldn't speak, just collapsed near the fire and didn't move for hours. When he finally looked up, all he said was, "It was so quiet." No one asked what he meant. No one needed to. There's a debate among scholars about whether desertion in these conditions should even count as betrayal. Some argue that leaving your unit in hostile territory is unforgivable, that it jeopardizes the cohesion, the logistics, the morale. Others say when command stops caring about your survival, You owe it nothing. Survival becomes its own chain of command. The truth is murkier, it usually is, because out here your mind starts to warp. Cold changes your thoughts, hunger alters your instincts. You begin to fantasize about stopping. Not dying, just not walking anymore. Sitting down under a tree and letting the snow cover you. That seems peaceful, easy, so when someone disappears you can't entirely blame them, not anymore. That night someone notices another man is gone. Quiet one, carried a lute, never played it. He left his instrument behind. It's sitting by the fire now untouched. You stare at it for a while, wondering if that's a message or just an offering. Maybe both. You don't play it. No one does. But you do wrap it in a blanket, tuck it under a wagon, just in case. Because maybe he's coming back. Or maybe someone else will need it more. The tent collapses around 3 in the morning, which is really the perfect time for a full-on fabric-based disaster. You're asleep. Well, not truly asleep. More like that miserable in-between state where your body is still shivering under a damp blanket and your brain keeps jerking awake to make sure you're not dead. And then, suddenly, your world becomes cloth and snow and someone's elbow in your face. You gasp as canvas folds in around your shoulders, cold air flooding in like a curse. Someone swears, someone else kicks blindly. A pole cracks with a snap that sounds way too much like a bone, and then the whole thing just sags into a wet, heavy pile of regret. Congratulations, you've survived another night, barely, and now you're lying in a snow-covered sleeping bag under what used to be your shelter, praying you didn't lose your only pair of dry socks in the collapse. You crawl out from under the mess, shaking snow from your hood, boots crunching in the half-frozen sludge where the fire used to be. One of your tent mates is already trying to prop the fabric back up using a salvaged spear and an ice-crusted tree branch. It's not working. Another emergency in the land of frostbite and disappointment. It's not the first tent to fall this week. It's probably not the last. The weight of the snow alone is enough to bring down most of these makeshift structures, and that's not even counting the wind, the sagging guy ropes, or the fact that none of you slept through even one woodworking class in your life. You're improvising architecture out here with the emotional stability of soggy parchment. Historically, medieval tents weren't designed for this. Not this cold, not this kind of prolonged exposure to snowstorms and wind tunnels. They were canvas and leather, built for short-term stops in fields, not for surviving near the tree line of some nameless frostbitten peak. Officers might have had thick-walled pavilion tents, supported by wooden frames and reinforced with ropes, but the average soldier, you got what you could carry, maybe a wedge tent shared with 4 others, maybe a blanket draped over 2 sticks, maybe just your cloak and the sheer force of spite. The fabric gets soaked, freezes, sags, the stakes pull loose in the wind. The ropes go slack or worse, snap entirely. You remember one poor soul who tied his entire tent to a tree branch which then broke in the night and collapsed directly onto his face. He woke up with a bloody nose and a brand new fear of pine trees. Fringe idea? Some armies allegedly used animal hides oiled and stretched to make better insulated shelters. There's even a rumour that one alpine mercenary unit packed along a tent made entirely from stitched together goatskins. You don't know if it worked, but you do know no one wanted to share it after the 3rd day. You try to salvage what you can. The canvas is soaked, the poles bent, and the ropes somewhere under a foot of snow. You fish them out one by one, fingers numb and clumsy, and try not to cry when your left thumb stops responding entirely. You shake it hard and slap it, curse it. Eventually it tingles back to life, but just barely. Around you the rest of the camp is stirring, and by stirring you mean groaning like a collection of haunted furniture. Another tent goes down about 20 yards away, collapsing with a slow, wet whump that's equal parts hilarious and tragic. The soldier inside doesn't even get up. He just groans from under the canvas. I live here now, you understand the sentiment. The commander, Sir Anselm, is already up, of course. He walks the camp, muttering to his aides, one of whom is carrying an armload of collapsed tent poles like kindling. The commander's own shelter, naturally, is still standing, reinforced by some kind of reinforced frame and probably black magic. You don't resent him for it. Much. You chew on a chunk of stale bread while trying to rethread a guy rope through the corner of your canvas. It feels like trying to tie a knot with frozen twigs. A nearby soldier offers you a bit of charcoal to mark your ropes. An old trick. When everything's white, black lines help, you nod thanks. You don't have the energy to speak. Shelter repair becomes the job of the morning, Marching is delayed. No one complains. Everyone's too cold and too grateful for the excuse to stay near the fires, even if those fires are barely more than smoke and stubborn orange embers. You see one guy trying to dry his gloves by holding them over a flickering flame. They catch fire. He doesn't react for 3 full seconds. It's hard to explain the kind of mental fatigue that sets in after a night like this. It's not just lack of sleep. It's the knowledge that everything you depend on, your shelter, your warmth, your sanity, can collapse at any moment, and you won't even be surprised. You remember saying someone told you early in the campaign, tents are temporary, so is suffering. It was supposed to be inspiring. You now think that person has never spent a week sleeping on a slope while snow melted through their only blanket. There's still debate among scholars about how medieval armies managed prolonged winter encampments. Some insist they built semi-permanent shelters, dug out cabins, fire pits lined with stone, even small walls to break the wind. Others argue that the pace of war rarely allowed for such luxuries, and that most soldiers just suffered through it, one half-frozen night at a time. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, but you know this: no one who has ever camped on a snowy ridge thinks of war as glorious. By midday you've managed to get your tent back up, sort of. It's leaning to one side like it's had a long night out, but it'll hold. Probably. You throw your blanket inside, sit down and close your eyes for 5 whole seconds before someone yells that a new storm is blowing in from the west. You want to scream. Instead, you start repacking the ropes. Because when you're marching through winter mountains, tents don't feel like shelter. They feel like promises the weather intends to break. There's something eerie about a whisper in the snow, not just the sound itself, though that's bad enough, all soft and slithering like wind trying to imitate a voice, but the way it spreads. A few words, spoken too quietly to take seriously, ripple through camp faster than news of a supply cart. And before long, people are whispering not to each other, but to themselves, because once it gets in your head, it stays. This time the whisper starts with the old woman, not the cart one. A different one, thinner, quieter, with a face like a dried apple, and hands that tremble when she pours soup. She's been walking behind the army since the valley, always near the edge of the campfire glow, never talking unless someone speaks first. Nobody really noticed her before. Now everyone does. She says the snow is seeking. That would be easier to ignore if it weren't for the fact that she says it with no drama at all. Just a matter-of-fact tone, like announcing the time of day. Like it's not news. Like the snow has always had something to say and we've just been rude guests. You laugh it off. At first, you and everyone else, the idea that snow, the literal source of your misery, might also be harbouring some kind of conscious opinion. No thanks, but then more people begin to chime in. A sentry says he heard his own name whispered while he stood watch. Another claims he saw shadows move through the trees that weren't thrown by firelight. One swears his footfalls echoed behind him, even though no one was there. Sleep doesn't come easy after that. Superstition spreads through an army like smoke. You don't want to breathe it in, but it curls around your face anyway, finds its way into your lungs, and then suddenly you're knocking on trees for luck and are sitting in the snow before every meal because someone says it keeps the spirits from watching. Historically, winter marches were always haunted, if not by ghosts, then by the creeping weight of dread that settles in when all the usual rules fall away. Soldiers recorded strange lights in the distance, dreamwalkers who left the tents in the night, even groups who followed what they thought were friendly scouts into the woods, only to vanish. Some scholars brush all that aside as exhaustion, frostbite induced delusion, or just the human tendency to invent meaning where there is none. Others point to patterns, recurring legends across cultures, across campaigns, all describing the same things. Silent shapes in the snow, voices that call you by name, winds that sound like they're thinking. Out here with your brain dulled by cold and the world stripped down to ice and ache, even the most skeptical mind starts to bend, just a little. You start noticing things, like the fact that no birds have been seen in days, or how every tree around camp seems to be leaning slightly toward the centre. Or how, when you wake in the middle of the night, you could swear you hear something crunching softly on the edge of camp. Not mules, not wolves, something walking slowly, in no hurry at all. One night a soldier near you wakes up screaming, not loud, just one sharp shout, then nothing. When you ask what happened, he just shakes his head and says, "She was standing inside the tent." No one asks who she is. Next morning he's gone, not dead, just gone. Left his pack, left his boots, you find his footprints leading into the woods. bare feet, deep clear, and just a few yards into the trees, they stop. Not fade, not turn around, just stop. No one follows them. You don't talk about it. No one does. But that day, several people tie small pouches of salt around their necks. One paints a red mark on the tree beside his tent and won't explain what it means. You spot a knight muttering prayers that don't sound like anything from your childhood chapel. And the old woman? She just watches. Still at the edge of camp, still feeding the fire like it's a living thing. Her eyes don't blink as much as they should. You don't ask her questions anymore. You have your own. You've started seeing things too, just at the edge of your vision. The moment between wake and sleep. A figure, maybe a person, maybe not, watching from just beyond the trees. Tall, wrapped in white. No face, no features, just presence. You blink and it's gone. But the imprint stays. A pressure in your chest or a certainty that something has noticed you. Fringe stories abound about mountains being alive. Not metaphorically, actually alive, breathing, dreaming, aware, that people walking too deep into them become part of them, absorbed like snowflakes into a drift. One tale says there are travellers who got lost 100 years ago and still walk in the fog, not realising they're dead. Another tells of a mountain that chooses a person each season to keep. You used to roll your eyes at that. You don't anymore. Now you carry a charm in your pocket. It's just a twig tied with string and a bone bead. You don't know what it's supposed to do here, but the cart woman gave it to you without a word and you haven't taken it out of your coat since. You haven't told anyone about the dreams, about the one where you're walking alone endlessly, and every tree you pass is whispering a different version of your name, or the one where your reflection in the ice doesn't blink when you do, or the one where you wake up in your tent, open your eyes, and the snow is falling up. Historically, no one wrote about this. You find no mentions of it in journals or scrolls. No chroniclers recorded the nightmares or the whispered names, only the numbers, the dates, the loss. But the soldiers knew. And you know now that the mountain doesn't just kill. Sometimes it talks first. Your nose is bleeding again, not from a fight, not from a fall, just from existing at this altitude. The air is thin, dry, and bites at the inside of your skull like it's trying to climb out through your sinuses. You press a dirty rag to your face and pinch the bridge of your nose, but the blood keeps coming, warm against your freezing fingers. Great, just what you need. One more bodily fluid to manage in the endless laundry list of winter indignities. Everyone is coughing now. The kind of cough that starts in your chest and ends with something rattling in your throat like a rock in a metal cup. No one talks about it, because no one wants to admit what it is. But you all know altitude sickness, or exposure, or lung rot, maybe all three. Call it what you want. The air up here isn't for humans, you're too high. It's been days since you passed the tree line. That magical, invisible boundary where the last of the pines gave up trying to live, and now it's just snow, rock, and the occasional brave patch of moss. Trees meant firewood. They meant shelter. They meant a little visual variety. Now everything is grey, white, or the colour of whatever's leaking out of your own face, eh? Even sound changes up here. Your boots crunch in the snow, but the noise seems to vanish before it gets a foot away. When someone speaks, their voice sounds like it's being swallowed by the sky. And your breath, what little of it you can manage, leaves your body like smoke and disappears so quickly it feels like you're not even breathing at all. Marching is a nightmare. Your legs are heavy, your lungs feel like wrung-out bellows, and every 5 steps someone else in the column stops to lean on a spear and hack up something alarming. You watch one man drop to his knees, gasping like a fish, and then wave everyone on. "Keep going," he croaks. "I'll catch up." He won't. You've seen what this place does to bodies. The elevation changes everything. Blood doesn't flow right, muscles don't heal, your brain starts to feel like it's wrapped in cotton, and sometimes you forget simple things, your name, the day, whether you already ate or just dreamed about eating. Someone lit their boot on fire last night thinking it was their cooking pot, just stared at it, dazed, as the soul melted and smoked. Historically, high-altitude campaigns were often disasters in disguise. Commanders didn't understand what thin air could do. They pushed men higher and higher, assuming morale and discipline could outlast biology. They were wrong. Journals from these marches are filled with vague references to fatigue and sudden collapse. But what they really meant was, we were choking to death in slow motion, and no one knew why. Now you know. One of the medics, he used to be a barber, which feels somehow both comforting and deeply cursed, has started keeping track. He draws little marks in the snow near the path, counting how many soldiers stagger off, sit down, and never get back up. The marks get covered in snow eventually, but he keeps making them, says it helps. You believe him. There's debate among modern historians whether ancient armies truly understood the risks of altitude. Some argue that seasoned mountain folk, Swiss mercenaries, alpine troops, had built up tolerance, passed down tricks for surviving these elevations. Others think it was just natural selection. The weak died early, the strong kept marching, and everyone else hallucinated long enough to fake it. You don't feel strong, you feel like one big mistake waiting to happen. Your vision is doing that thing again, blurring at the edges, tunnelling like you're looking through a dirty spyglass. You blink hard, shake your head. It helps. A little. The snow is so bright that even with your hood down low, it's like staring into the sun's colder, meaner cousin. Then comes the headache. Not a normal one, not a 3, a pressure. Like someone's inflating a bladder inside your skull, your ears ring, your jaw aches. You take off your helmet and clutch it under your arm, trying not to panic. Breathe in, shallow, out, shallow, in again. Snow-laced wind fills your mouth like dry sand. You're not the only one. You glance around and see it happening everywhere. Slowed movements, glassy eyes, the occasional soldier swaying in place like they're drunk. Someone falls, another catches him. No yelling, no ceremony, just hands under arms pulling him back to his feet, and a quiet mutter of, "Not yet." You feel your heart thumping like it's trying to escape your chest. That's another fun side effect. Elevation takes your heart rate and cranks it up until even standing still feels like you've just finished a sprint. You don't even want to think about what it's doing to the older men. And the mules, forget it. One collapsed last night and didn't get back up. No visible injury, just gave out. They tried to coax it with apples, then with curses. Eventually they stripped its saddle and left it under a tarp. By morning it was gone. Either it crawled off to die quietly or something dragged it away. Either way, no one looks in that direction anymore. That evening a soldier approaches you with a handful of snow wrapped around a pine needle bundle. "Chew this," he says. "Good for the lungs." You do. Tastes like tree bark and desperation. But after a few minutes your coughing eases. Not by much, but enough. "Used to live in the hills," he explains. "You learn what trees give you, what medicine. Not much grows up here, though. You've got to bring the help with you." You ask what happens when the herbs run out. He doesn't answer. You lie down that night under your leaning tent wrapped in every fabric you own and try to breathe in a way that doesn't make your ribs ache. Sleep comes in strange waves, half dreams, half gasps. You wake twice, clawing at your own throat, certain you're suffocating. You're not yet, but it feels close. At some point you stop trying to fall asleep and just stare at the ceiling of your tent, watching frost form new galaxies overhead. The stars outside are bright, too bright. Up here, the sky feels closer than the ground, like you could fall upward if you stepped wrong. You close your eyes and whisper the same thing everyone's been whispering for days now, just get us down. The path narrows so much that you're no longer marching, you're balancing. One foot in front of the other, arms slightly out for stability, body angled like a tightrope walker over a ledge, where the stakes aren't applause but obliteration. To your right, a jagged wall of frozen stone. To your left, a drop so steep you can't even see the bottom, just fog, swirling and thick like though it's changed to hide how far you'd fall. This is what the guide calls the knife's edge. He says it with that maddening, casual tone of someone who's walked it dozens of times and only almost died twice. He doesn't even look down, just trudges along with the confidence of a goat that got tenure. You, on the other hand, are seriously reconsidering every decision you've ever made. Your boots slip. Just once, just slightly, enough for your stomach to lurch into your throat and your knees to buzz with adrenaline. The ice underfoot is packed into something that's no longer snow, but not quite rock, like the mountain decided to polish it for maximum cruelty. You crouch slightly, adjusting your weight. Breathe, then keep moving. Behind you, someone mutters a prayer. In front of you, another soldier whistles softly, probably to distract himself, or maybe to annoy everyone else. Historically, these kinds of mountain passes were not just hazards, they were tests. For armies attempting to cross ranges like the Alps, the Carpathians, or the Caucasus, narrow ridgelines like this were where everything could fall apart. One wrong step, one panicked mule, one gust of wind with bad timing, and suddenly you weren't a marching unit anymore. You were a list of names someone else would have to explain. There's a reason so many commanders avoided high passes unless absolutely necessary. And you're now walking through exactly why. The wind here is alive, it doesn't just blow, it hunts, comes in from the west without warning, curling around the cliff wall, slamming into you sideways like an invisible hand trying to sweep you into the void. You lean into it, every muscle screaming not to fall, your cloak flaps violently, becomes a liability, so you tear it off and tie it around your waist. Better cold than airborne. One of the supply sleds doesn't make it. The mule pulling it stumbles, maybe on a rock, maybe on fear, and the sled yanks sideways. The driver tries to hold it steady, ropes wrapped around gloved hands. But he's no match for momentum. The entire load, supplies, firewood, dried meat, everything slides over the edge, no sound, just gone. There's a collective silence. No one speaks. You all just keep walking, the pace slower now, more reverent, like the path itself demands a moment of respect for the loss. Even the wind calms down for a few minutes, like it's digesting. Then comes the bridge. It's not a real bridge, not in any modern sense. It's just a fallen tree, flattened and stripped of bark, stretched across a chasm that makes your stomach perform acrobatics just looking at it. On either side, snow's been packed down into ramps, slippery and unreliable. The guide goes first, of course he does. Doesn't even pause, just walks straight across like he's checking the mail. You hate him, a little. Then the others start. One by one, soldiers shuffle across, arms wide, feet slow and deliberate. One slips and drops his spear. It tumbles silently into the void. He makes it across, barely, and immediately drops to his knees on the other side, kissing the snow like it's sacred. Then it's your turn. You step up, look down, instantly regret that. No bottom, just fog and wind and your own heartbeat in your throat. You place one foot on the log. It moves. Not much, just a wobble, but enough to make you reconsider the concept of balance as a trustworthy friend. Deep breath, you take another step, and another. The log creaks, your boots creak, you creak. Halfway now, you're sweating despite the cold, and every muscle is locked, tense. Your hands are out, fingers splayed like they might somehow catch the air and keep you upright if you fall. 3 more steps. 2, 1. You step onto the far side and suddenly it's over. You're across. You inhale, exhale, and the air doesn't feel quite so sharp anymore. You don't kiss the snow, but you do sit down for a moment and let your legs shake in private. You watch the next few come across. Not everyone makes it look graceful. One man crawls the whole way. Another closes his eyes and runs it, which is insane but weirdly effective. The rest follow, one after another, until the column is whole again. You keep moving. The path stays narrow for another mile, then begins to widen, just slightly. Enough for 2 soldiers to walk side by side. Conversation returns. Quiet at first, like no one wants to jinx it, then louder. Someone even sings, just a little. A hymn, off-key but comforting. You look back at the knife's edge, now shrinking in the distance, and feel a strange mix of pride and nausea. There are scholars who insist that these kinds of paths were exaggerated in later retellings, that medieval armies would have had the foresight to avoid them or carve alternate routes. Others argue that these exact routes became famous because they were used, because some desperate commander, pressed for time or escape, dragged an entire column across a death trap and lived to write it down. You wonder what future generations will say about this ridge, whether your name will be listed among those who made it, whether anyone will remember how it felt, not the danger, but the way the silence settled afterward. That clean, hollow stillness that comes only when you've survived something you weren't supposed to. That night, camp is made on a ledge barely wide enough for 3 tents. You huddle beside a fire that keeps trying to go out, and your body aches in places you didn't know had nerve endings. But you're alive. Your rations taste better tonight, even though they're there the same. The sky seems bigger, like the stars came closer just to see who made it. And the wind doesn't speak anymore, at least not tonight. You wake to the sound of cracking. Not loud, more like the subtle crunch of breaking ice somewhere far below you, but close enough to feel through your ribs. It's not the kind of sound that causes panic. It's worse than that. It causes waiting. The breathless, frozen hesitation of 100 men all wondering if they just heard the same thing you did. No one speaks, not even Piper. Just a tense stillness. And then, another crack. Louder this time. Closer. Avalanche. Someone whispers the word like it's a spell, afraid that saying it out loud will trigger the rest. Maybe it will. Maybe the mountains are listening again. Maybe they never stopped. You burst from your tent just in time to see a plume of powder rolling down a distant slope like a tidal wave made of dust and hunger. It isn't heading for the camp, yet, but you can feel the vibration under your boots, like the earth is giving you one final warning. Not you this time, but maybe soon. Avalanches are the mountain's most dramatic form of feedback. You've heard them before, rumbling in the distance, booming like thunder buried beneath snow. But this is the closest one yet. And it's not just the noise, it's the sudden aliveness of the terrain. Like the mountain just remembered it had teeth. People scramble into action. Not out of panic, but out of a grim, well-practiced understanding. Everyone knows what to do: get clear of slopes, avoid shouting, don't walk in tight formations, spread out, step lightly, step slow. The mules are already being pulled from the edge of the ridge. Some refuse to move, hooves locked into the ice. One man actually whispers to his mule like it's a lover, "Don't do this now. Not today." The mule eventually moves. Smart creature. The next hour is nerve-rattling. You move through the snow like a thief, each footstep deliberate. The entire column slows to a crawl, but no one complains. A single misstep, a single shift of weight, could bring the entire mountain down on you. Snow above you is stacked in unnatural shelves, the edges curled like the lip of a giant frozen wave. Every noise feels louder. Armor clinks, teeth chatter. Even the breath in your throat sounds like a bell. Someone drops a pot. It clangs against a rock, metal on stone. Everyone freezes. Nothing happens. But you see a ridge in the distance shake, just slightly, like the mountain considered it. Historically, avalanches were some of the most feared killers in medieval mountain campaigns. Entire units were wiped out without a single enemy arrow fired. One wrong fire placement, one unlucky thunderclap, one idiotic marching song, and snow that had been building up for weeks would come cascading down in a fury. Some chroniclers described them as skyborn ghosts, white beasts, or even God's erasure. You believe it. There's a half-true story about a king whose army crossed the Alps and lost 300 men to one avalanche. Another version says it was 500, but that the king swore the snow was aimed at him. Superstition or not, from that day forward, he supposedly marched with one hand on his sword and one hand clutching a snowball, to befriend the mountain. You don't know what that means, but you're tempted to try it. The terrain here becomes sharper, rockier, the snow less deep but more treacherous, hidden patches of ice, loose gravel. One man slips and breaks his wrist trying to catch himself. He doesn't scream, just bites down on a leather strap and nods for someone to pull him up. A medic binds it with cloth soaked in liquor. "You'll live," he says, "unless you do that again." Morale is brittle, not broken, but dangerously close. You can feel it in the way no one meets each other's eyes. You march with your head down, focused on the path, counting steps as if numbers might protect you. Some do it in rhythm, 20 steps rest, 20 more. Others mumble under their breath their own private chants. And then, a miracle. The ridge opens. The path begins to slope gently down. The snow is softer here. Not fresh, but less packed. A stream runs nearby, liquid, not frozen solid. Trees appear in the distance again. First one, then another. The first bird song in days flits through the air like a sound from a memory you didn't think you still had. Someone collapses, not from injury, but relief. You realise that, against all odds, you've crossed. The worst is over. The mountains are behind you now, grey peaks stabbed into the clouds like broken teeth. The descent begins. It's not easy. Your knees ache from the constant braking. Your shoulders scream from hauling weight over unstable ground. But it's downhill. The air starts to feel heavier, thicker. You cough. And this time it doesn't hurt as much. You can breathe. Someone takes off their scarf, another dares to laugh. You even hear Piper tuning his instrument again. It's an ugly sound, but it's welcome. Historically, survivors of such crossings often reported a kind of euphoria after the worst passes were behind them. Not celebration exactly, just a low humming relief that clung to the soul like warm cloth. The understanding that you were still alive. That the mountain hadn't taken you. Not yet. At camp that night, there are no tents pitched near cliffs, no fires built under snow shelves. Everyone huddles close to the valley wall. Someone makes stew out of the last of the dried peas, and a squirrel that one of the scouts managed to kill with a thrown rock. It's the best thing you've tasted in weeks. You don't sleep well. Too many nerves still humming, too much tension stored in your spine. But when you do sleep, you don't dream of the mountain. You dream of green valleys, of mud, of roads, of grass, that might be the first sign that your mind is beginning to return. As you lie there, curled beside the embers, someone asks softly, "How many did we lose?" No one answers, but in your heart you know, not the exact number, but the weight of it. In missing voices, in empty places around the fire, in names you haven't spoken aloud since the last camp 3 ridges back. The mountain doesn't brag, doesn't announce its victories, but it always takes something, and you, lucky you, are what it left behind.